Senator and Chairman of this committee, Richard Burr, will introduce Ms. Gabbard shortly. We look forward to your remarks. I think it's fair to say that Ms. Gabbard's nomination has generated a bit more interest and attention than do most nominees before this committee. But I want to stress that Ms. Gabbard has been and will be treated with the exact same respect, consideration, and professionalism that we extended to every nominee. No more, no less, no better, no worse. That's how we treated CIA Director John Ratcliffe just 2 weeks ago, and how we have treated D&I nominees like Avril Haines and Dan Coates in the past. For instance, Ms. Gabbard has conducted dozens of office meetings with senators. She has completed the committee's standard questionnaire. She has answered 247 questions in writing. This is all in keeping with the committee's customs, precedents, and rules. Before I address the important work ahead at the D&I, please also let me make two observations about some of the accusations about Ms. Gabbard. First, I'm dismayed by the attacks on Ms. Gabbard's patriotism and her loyalty to our country. For instance, Hillary Clinton has smeared Ms. Gabbard, calling her an asset of a foreign nation. Let me remind everyone that Ms. Gabbard has served in our Army for more than 2 decades. She has multiple combat tours, and she still wears the uniform to this day. She has undergone 5 FBI background checks. I spent more than 2 hours last week reviewing the latest, putting eyes on more than 300 pages. It's clean as a whistle. It's fine that we have differences of opinions on policies and programs. I suspect some of my Republican colleagues might disagree with some of Mrs. Gabbard's votes in the House of Representatives. Just as I suspect that some of my Democratic colleagues might criticize Ms. Gabbard's statements and actions since she saw the light and left the Democratic Party. But I sincerely hope that no one today will impugn Ms. Gabbard's patriotism and integrity. Second, I can only Gaddafi had been scared straight after we toppled the Taliban and Saddam Hussein. He turned over his weapons of mass destruction and cooperated against
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. It's January 30th, 2025. We are going to briefly watch the opening of the confirmation hearing of Tulsi Gabbard, which I think will be much of the same kind of ritual to make us accept the nomination. I don't think her confirmation is in any real danger in any more than Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s confirmation was in danger. Yet I think it's still worth keeping track of this. This is still American history, even if it's American history theater. If you want to find out who you're talking to and look me up, you can look on PubMed at the Library of Medicine's PubMed website, COUEY, first initials J and J. I think this will work.
Stable democracies make the most stable friends, but what matters in the end is less whether a country is democratic or non-democratic, and more whether the country is pro-American or anti-American. I'll confess that those views may be somewhat unconventional, but look at where conventional thinking has got us. Maybe Washington could use a little more unconventional thinking.
I'm not really sure these remarks are even worth hearing at this stage. Remember, it's more important that we stay focused on the longer time horizons and not what's happening today or tomorrow or which person in white is in front of us next. We need to be very, very careful to keep focused on the right things, ladies and gentlemen. We should be live on YouTube as well. If you want to get those views up and open another window and put that one on mute just to make sure that we get the maximum viewing of this broadcast, I would really appreciate
Now, Dr.
it.
Gallo and Dr. Fauci talked a lot about isolation and purification. Can you tell me what the difference is between the two?
Isolation, what was it?
Isolation and purification?
Of the virus?
Yes.
Well, you isolate a virus by finding the virus which causes a disease. You purify a virus by making a lot of, just by purifying it so you get a pure virus.
Okay.
I don't understand what the
Well, they
issue.
they interchange the two, and I wasn't sure
I see.
If it was the same thing or if it was two totally different.
No, it depends on how they use it.
Can you explain the process of HIV isolation?
Well, didn't Dr. Gallo do that? He actually isolated it. So,
Yeah.
Why should I do all of this? This is all textbook stuff you're asking me.
It doesn't matter much at all what you believe about vaccines until we invent really important ones, until we have a pandemic that's killing everyone, and it's measles plus, okay, I can tolerate what you think about measles because, not that many people die from it. It's just a big hassle in the end. But no, when we have this new pandemic that is, got 75% mortality and there'll be no pretense of being polite in the face of these beliefs. It'll be a moral emergency because it has to be.
By about 1660, John Locke wrote that day laborers and tradesmen, spinsters and dairymaids must be told what to believe. The greatest part cannot know, and therefore they must believe.
It's literally turning into worst case scenario.
The latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case
scenario. It's literally turning into worst case scenario.
The latest data tells us that we're dealing with
literally turning into worst case scenario.
I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're
literally
dealing
turning
with
into worst case scenario.
I'm afraid that the latest
thing, but you can tell if someone's lying. You can sort of feel it in people. And I have lied. I'm sure I'll lie again. I don't want to lie. I don't think I'm a liar. I try not to be a liar. I don't want to be a liar. I think it's really important not to be a liar.
I think truth is good for kids. We're so busy lying, we don't even recognize the truth no more in society. We want everybody to feel good. That's not the way life is.
The rules, protect yourself at all times. Follow my instructions. Keep it clean, touch gloves if you wish, let's do it.
Sweaty palms. This is so crazy. Like goosebumps. This is so crazy. I feel so nervous. Like, what in the world, man?
He introduced Jonathan, who's going to talk about his latest kind of distillation of what the pandemic means to society, to biology, to science, and to democracy, and to the whole kind of idea of empiricism and integrity. And then each of us, this incredible preeminent panel that we have, each one of you is going to get a chance to comment.
10 buildings currently being built, but that will expand to 20, and other locations beyond the Abilene location, which is our first location. The kind of applications that we're building, to give you an idea, maybe the most charismatic and the one that I think touches us all is electronic health records, not just maintaining electronic health records, but by looking at
electronic health records. He goes right there. There it is.
Electronic health records, understanding the condition of doctors, better understanding the condition of their patients, and being able to provide healthcare plans that are much better than they otherwise would be. A doctor in Indian River Reservation would be able to see how a doctor at Memorial Sloan Kettering would treat the patient.
I don't care how you get there. I don't care what you do to get there. The goal is to win.
What time is it? Game time! Woo!
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, America and Earth. This is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. Only knowledge can dispel their enchantment. Only knowledge, and that's what we're here for. We're trying to work together to pull our heads out of this cave. We are definitely in interesting times. I don't know if they're fun or exciting, but they're definitely interesting. I hope that we can find more people who are trying to be like Galileo and speak the truth of what they see. Your consciousness is the prime real estate that these people are attempting to occupy. It is their prime real estate, and they are fighting for it, fighting between one another for it. That's what these social media military platforms allow them to do, because it's not a matter of what's true that counts, but what is perceived to be true. And even Henry Kissinger knew that. That's how they do it with money, and that's how they do it with history. And if we don't start reading old books, and we don't start looking at how these bad ideas have been handed down to us, by looking at the history that's available to us, we are going to be lost forever. Those of us who can see have to show those who can see when shown, and the rest, I don't know. Because there's only one chance for them to feed this data into their God, into their AI, before the population of the Earth isn't big enough anymore, before these games can't be collected. The reality is that Edward Bernays told us what was going on before he ever knew how it would be done. Noam Chomsky explained how it was being done, but didn't understand the extent to which they would be given access to our consciousness with the phones and with social media. It has really become disturbing how easy it is to stay committed to a set of lies, a mythology about where our country came from, what moves our country, and what problems our country needs to solve most urgently. This spectacular commitment to lies is all that's required. We are being governed by mythology. And if we don't break out of that mythology, very, very soon our children will be masked up again, and our children will be farther away from us. The responsibility that we have over our children will be slowly that of the government. And if we continue to allow these people with connections to the Human Genome Project and the Department of Energy and secret projects and lies, all the way back to the HIV fiasco, our children will be enslaved by these myths. The only way out is to learn real biology. That's the only way out, is learning biology yourself and learning history yourself. Otherwise, your children will definitely be enslaved by this fake history that we've been handed down. This fake history that has been enacted in front of us in the newspapers and on TV and now on social media. We have acquiesced to it. We have given power over to charlatans. We inherited from our parents, and we gave more power to charlatans on social media. You almost never get it back when you do that, but this time could be different if we pull out right now. If we get our heads back on straight and realize that intramuscular injection in general is dumb. Transfection of healthy humans was always criminal. Even before the pandemic, it would have been. And RNA cannot pandemic. It just simply cannot do what the cartoon says it's done. And here's the real truth that YouTube can't handle. the vaccine schedule in America is indeed a criminal enterprise because there is no strict liability, because the government is not held to strict scrutiny under any circumstances when removing or suspending fundamental rights. This is the truth, and this is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist who's trying to bring some of that truth to you. I'm going to cut over here. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gigaohm Biological. My name is JJCouey. I'm coming to you live from Pittsburgh in the back of my garage. It is another cold January morning, and we've got lots to do. There's a confirmation hearing live behind me, and I'm going to go to that in a second, but I just want to do a quick summary to make sure you understand where we are and how we got here. My name is JJCouey. I am a former academic biologist at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. I was a patch clamp physiologist. This photograph is actually taken, I don't know which finger to use. This photograph was actually taken in Norway at the NTNU in Trondheim, but it's the same idea. You make recordings from neurons that are isolated in brain slices, and you look at how they talk to each other. You do experiments and pharmacological analysis on those electrical currents, and you study the proteins that allow those currents to travel in and out of the phospholipid bilayer, and that's all that I ever did. The implications of those experiments, what the heck just happened there? I must have hit a keyboard shortcut. Went all the way back to the beginning. I got to learn that shortcut because I don't know that shortcut. Wow, that was cool. So if you want to find out a little bit about me, you can look up Gigaohm and Gigaohm Biological, and you can look up what Gigaohm means. It actually is a resistance value, and it is involved in the making of those recordings. You can look at my work on PubMed using my last name, Couey, and the first name, JJ, the first initials, JJ. And you can actually swing over, let's see, how do I do this? I put this one, and then I do this one, and then I do this one. You can actually swing over to this slide. I can blank this out and blank that out. And you can pause the video here, and you can read this list of reasons why you might consider my position on the last 5 years of biology to be a unique position and one worth considering. I've had a lot of experience interacting with other biologists and other scientists and other would-be dissidents during the last 5 years of the COVID so-called pandemic. And I think I've come to understand how this military operation was pulled off and how social media was used against us, and it's not just algorithms. And in fact, I would say that algorithms have virtually nothing to do with it. So I've tried to build this calendar to allow us to discuss longer timelines, because I've become convinced that basically social media makes it really hard for most people who are skillfully using it to consider a timeline, anywhere from 3 weeks earlier to about a week ahead. And this, roughly 1 month of attention that you have, that you're looking at any given time, makes it very difficult for anyone who's just passively existing to put current events into a historical context that will give them any handhold on how to understand them. And in fact, social media is used most malevolently to discourage people from trying to put events into a longer and a wider time horizon context. They don't want you to understand recent history, even in the last year or two, never mind the last 2 or 3 administrations, never mind the last 10 years or 15 years, and to have a continuous understanding of that history, which might enable you to see how often we've been lied to. And that's really the trick. I don't want to be that guy, but it's turned out that they've lied so much about biology that even if I just stick to being a biologist, it's really hard not to fall into this this bucket of conspiracy theorists, because you can see people coordinatedly lying, creating incongruencies that you would never do if your intentions weren't malevolent. And that's why I think it's for all the marbles. I think it's for all the kids on Earth. It's all for all the grandkids that are to come. It's for their medical data, for their genetic data, and for their mental and economic enslavement. And so when I say it's for all the marbles, I really mean it's for all the marbles. Now, I've had contact with a lot of people, including a guy who's going to be in front of Congress today, and is interested in being confirmed as the Health and Human Services Secretary. The post in the government which would declare a health emergency equivalent to the pandemic. And I also have a friend who's up for NIH director, which is kind of interesting. I've got a long track record on PubMed, signified by more than 15 years of chasing tenure. And since 2020, I've been trying to figure out what's going on with the pandemic. By May of 2021, I had already written a review about transfection, about what I thought it was going to do to the virus that was in circulation. And a lot of those opinions that I had formulated by May of 2021 were due to the numbers of people that had come to my house, that had called me, that had streamed with me. And so very humbly, I submit that in 2021, I thought I knew what was going on. In a lot of ways I did. But in a lot of ways at that current time point, I would have been confused about much of the biology because I had not yet matured sufficiently in my understanding, in my ability to see where the illusion was as a biologist, because that's the trick. Unless you have pondered these questions for your entire life and worked hard at becoming or reaching the cutting edge of biology in one field or another, and actually participated in that race in academia, which almost none of these people that are now in front of us claiming to have a solution to what's going on, an explanation for what happened, they have not attempted to get through a tenure track and achieve tenure. They have not tried to get NIH grants to do basic biological sciences. None of them have. Brett Weinstein and Heather Haying have not done that. And you can look at their track record of publications and you can see that they have not done that. They gave up any semblance of attempting to become a high-level basic science biological professor once they went to Evergreen. They were not in a lab. There was no laboratory possibility. There's no animal facilities there. There's no science to be done. So if they go out in the wild and run around and collect things, that's not NIH biomedical sciences. That's something else. And so they aren't aware of how that system works. No matter how often they say that they are, they're not. And surprisingly, Meryl Nass and Mary Holland and many of the people that are on the list of current heroes and Maha movement people are not qualified to speak to how academia has been destroyed by Bad Biology 101, has been destroyed by very, very bad simplistic ideas, which are the foundational assumptions of entire departments at medical schools across the United States and the rest of the Western world. And so I think we've got a pretty unique story here. I guess my best claim to fame, you can see over there, is I helped Bobby Kennedy write this book, and actually Robert F. Kennedy Jr. put me in the acknowledgments as the first listed expert. And so, you know, unlike Brett Weinstein, I think I have some reasonable insight into where we are, how we got here, and who brought us here, including Brett Weinstein. There is only one chance in history for the population pyramid to be harvested like Go games, harvested like chess games. The Human Genome Project has always been kind of an illusion. When Francis Collins and Mark Lander declared victory in 2005 or whenever it was, they'd really only sequenced, and that is created restriction enzyme maps of a couple 3 genomes, if you count the one that Craig Venter did as well. and even if I'm slightly wrong and it's 5 genomes, they have not actually succeeded in doing anything that would remotely resemble what they did with Go or what they did with chess, which is to collect the data from millions, if not billions, of games, repetitions of the same game, and then the AI was able to use that data and a simple learning network to solve those games. And now Go was celebrated as a very big accomplishment, but they intend to, and they've always intended to, since Joshua Lederberg first was able to codify this idea, they've always intended to crack the human genome by collecting, measuring as many as possible, and then using computers to brute force the solution. They have never thought that some Isaac Newton would be sitting under a microscope and the right idea would drop out of the objective into his brain and he would go, eureka, I understand how DNA encodes for a pattern integrity with a trajectory across time. But they have admitted already that they are going to do this. They have admitted it a long time ago. They have been admitting it since 2005 as they've told you all the shortcomings and how this is just getting started and we need to develop the technology for the next step. And so now they have the technology for the next step. They have super cheap sequencing technologies. They have relatively cheap data storage, and they are now starting to assemble the kinds of, linked bulk brute force computing power that can use some of those data sets. So now they have to build that infrastructure, physically build that data center infrastructure that can be linked to those processor infrastructures. That's all this is. What will come out of it in the end, who cares? It doesn't really matter because it's all being used as a justification for this move forward, the creation of the noosphere, the creation of a global government, the creation of global governance by mythology. This is all part of that same thing. That's why I say that they only have this one chance, because they do want to reduce. They know that the population of the Earth is going to reduce because the population bump that we are experiencing now with a lot of old people and a lot of retiring people and a lot of empty homes, this is going to be over, and there's not a replacing population coming up behind them. We are going to have far fewer people in America in 20 years. That is the reality. And these people are taking advantage of those known effects of that known change and creating a mythology of governance, of control, of good governance. And that's how they're going to bamboozle our children, enslave our children. It's been a long, strange trip. I've lost my best friend from college here. I'm down here at the bottom. I've made friends and I've made enemies. I don't know who all these meddlers are, but they all seem to show up and ask me to write a book chapter and then disappear, for example, or don't want to take a selfie with me, or even come to my house after I've already spent a couple years on the internet saying, don't come to my house. I think you're a liar. And they still come to my house and ask if they can stay overnight. They even send me love notes like this guy did. I think I'm going to share that one now. Where do I have that? Hold on one second. I got to go find my wallet. Because even Ryan Cole sent me a love note. I carried around in my if you can believe it, she's not talking yet. Tulsi Gabbard is not talking yet. So I carry around a little note in my wallet that's from this exact photograph right here. This is Ryan Cole. How do I gotta move this way? This is Ryan Cole, and this is at the inaugural CHD conference in Knoxville, Tennessee in 2022, where this picture was also taken where I first met Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and where these pictures were taken where I met Jill Glasspool Malone and Robert Malone, who said that he didn't know who I was and pulled his hand away in disgust when I first stopped him in the hallway and tried to say thank you to him. I also met Whitney Webb up there at the same conference. Anyway, at that conference, Ryan Cole ran up to me and took this picture and gave me this note. And I think I can show this note without giving away any... So, Jonathan, you're awesome. The world needs more critical thinkers like you. Stay in touch. I love what you do. And then on the back, it says, I'm always behind, but here are my contacts. And he gave me his cell phone number, 2 different emails. And I've tried to get him on my show a number of times. Then I actually saw him at the Brownstone in November of last year in Pittsburgh. And he basically said exactly the same things. And also we should be on, I should have him on my show and I should contact him. And of course it's been crickets. And we're not whining about that. What we're just trying to explain is that all of these people know who I am, have even done things like give me little love notes that are clearly lies. Lies coming from a guy who was on stage with Lee Min Yan, Paul Urso, Robert Malone in 2021 in Christian churches around America, rallying the Christian right, organizing the populist movement in America for maybe Steve Bannon, maybe for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., maybe for Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and the new social media that was bursting onto the scene at the beginning of the pandemic. I have no idea. Maybe it was for a supplement company or 3. Maybe it was for testing companies, which none of these people on this screen have ever usefully questioned, from Kevin McKernan of the Human Genome Project to Robert Malone or Jill Glasspool Malone or Jay Bhattacharya. Jay Bhattacharya had nothing to say about PCR testing, its fidelity, its possible misconstruing a background for spread. None of that stuff, even though he's been friends with me for like 4 years now and says he's learned more biology from me than anyone else. So that's the news program you're watching. Not to toot my own horn too much, but, I don't want anybody to be disappointed on YouTube for the first time seeing me after all these years of being on the bicycle, to not know where I am. And where I am is that I've become pretty convinced that these people have been trying to trick adults through fear, uncertainty, and doubt into teaching their children that we need to fear free-range RNA viruses and free-range RNA molecules, and that's just ridiculous. And it would be very, very bad for anyone to teach their kids that RNA and DNA is nonsense. And so I think that there was a concerted effort orchestrated by this group I would call Team Worst Case Scenario, that were on social media specifically to coerce adults with fear, uncertainty, and doubt into accepting that there was a novel virus that may have come from a laboratory. And so you better make your decisions very carefully, which might include masking for a couple years, might include social distancing for a couple years, might even include taking a transfection that, in the grand scheme of things, might be less risky than a gain-of-function virus out of a laboratory in China. And so that fooled some people into using ivermectin. It fooled some people into taking transfection or taking an adenovirus transformation or any number of other things, including isolating their grandparents or hugging them from the other side of a plastic sheet. And all of these people were involved in that. Anyone that streamed with Robert Malone or Meryl Nass or Stephen Hatfill or Jessica Rose or George Webb, they're all part of the same show. I don't know if it's the FBI because nobody mentions the FBI, or if it's DITRA because nobody mentions DITRA, or if it's any one of the other 17 intelligence agencies, or any one of the other countless possible weaponized piles of private money that would want to extend the testing regime and the illusion of the virus and only question the shot as a vaccine, not as an old methodology that everybody understood as a general term, transfection, which is what I've been trying to say since 2020. And so team worst case scenario is how we got here. Team worst case scenario is how we got here. How we now have a Trump administration with a Maha subgroup that is composed of a bunch of people that include this guy, who's a former Human Genome Project research and development director, telling a verifiably incorrect story about the writing of this book, the staffing of this book. I don't understand why he's telling the lies, but I do know that he has been a personal clown car of mine since the start of the pandemic. This person has been meddling with my ability to make sense of things and to make a living and to teach other people the truth. And for a while, I just thought it was egos getting in the way. But in the end, I've come to understand him as one of the primary players in this theater. And so in doing so, I've been trying to characterize what this team worst case scenario did in 2020. And what they've done really is they played the role of social media. This guy is sitting in a chair and he's shooting Star Wars ships, and he really thinks that it's a lot of fun. It feels really cool because the chair moves in response to his joystick and pedal movements, and the video is really good in his goggles. It's very high resolution video, and the sound in his headphones is perfectly coordinated with the game. Well, unlike this game where you know that you're sitting in an apparatus and you know you're playing an imaginary game, social media feels like this game, but then like you're interacting with people. You're at a dinner party, or you're at a scientific meeting, or you're in a very important coffee where the people that you most want to be there are there, and you're having a real engaging discussion about the latest news on the internet. And that's not actually what's happening. What's happening is that these people are pretending, and you believe that they're listening to you. Anonymous accounts on the internet are pretending to listen to them, and together they create some kind of illusion. It's an illusion that you think when you retweet them or when you like their tweet that somehow that whole system is responding to you. And look at that, boy, I'm glad these ideas are really rising. And in reality, it is a group of meddlers, a group of fake dissidents that has been on the internet pretending to rescue us, pretending to speak the truth, when in reality they have been slow rolling us into the same trap that is being actively baited on regular TV, on The View and on PBS NewsHour. It's all the same show. In fact, the two cannot work without, one cannot work without the other. Mainstream media by itself would be disbelieved by the vast majority of people if it wasn't for this Camp 2 behind the scenes on social media that provides hamster wheels for those people with too many questions to run in. If you have more questions than the PBS NewsHour has answers for, you turn to the internet. And so the internet necessarily, because of national security reasons, needs to be populated by and needs to be curated by people like Kevin McKernan during a thing like a pandemic, where you are going to completely 100% fake a crisis, red flag a crisis across the world, across all countries that had the same population pyramid problem to manage. And it was a myth full of expected outcomes for the countermeasure they were going to roll out as a vaccine, i.e. the transfection. So those people had very specific narratives. And those narratives at first sounded very innocuous, like it's a fear and cleavage site, or the spike protein is very, very curious, or they're censoring me, or maybe it's a lab leak and that's why they're covering up. Gain of function became this thing that everybody was talking about and needed to know the definition of. But hidden in there, hidden inside that list of seemingly innocuous questions, was actually cardiac damage due to the spike, and mitochondrial damage due to the spike, and amyloid or protein misfolding due to the spike, and long COVID because the spike. But we know already that long COVID is not anything different than what Judy Mikovits was going to bring out a vaccine for in the late 90s, chronic fatigue syndrome. It's no different. Amyloid and protein misfolding is a very common outcome of transfection systems on the bench. Mitochondrial damage is probably an expected outcome of transfection on the bench and an expected outcome of the use of these cationic lipids, which only maintain their relatively innocuous chemical state in the right pH and in the right conditions, which definitely are not guaranteed to exist after intramuscular injection. Cardiac damage is just one of many things known to happen to animals that are transfected simply because of the mechanical and physical nature of transfection. It is endothelium that is most likely to be hit during a transfection, during circulation, because it is in the capillaries where the lipid nanoparticle would become physically in contact with the surface of those membranes. Otherwise, it's very, very random. And so any autoimmunity that was built as a result of transfecting endothelium would inevitably and could inevitably result in myocarditis. That doesn't necessarily mean that the lipid nanoparticle had to go to the heart. It just means that once the immune system starts attacking markers that are associated with endothelium, it's also very possible that they'll attack the heart, and that is a place where, of course, the symptomology would be very grave. And so this list was seeded. It was probably even populated before the pandemic, and then people were given bits of it in a script. And his bit of his script was just that they are using PCR. It's just not the right way to use it, but PCR works, and there's definitely a novel virus. And he was busy on many, many, many podcasts. This is just one podcast. If you go and charted it out and found all the podcasts that he repeatedly visited, I think you would actually be shocked at how much time this guy spent podcasting on podcasts that didn't have that much coverage, repeating over and over again for what? And this culminated with him being on my podcast in December of 2021. And then about a week later, this meddler named Charles Rixey came to my house to convince me that the diffuse proposal was real. And then literally 3 years later, he goes on a huge podcast and said that Charles Rixey helped Robert F. Kennedy Jr. write that book, which is completely a lie. He was actually hired with me to write this book and then was fired a couple weeks later. And the staff of who helped write this book knows exactly when and why it happened. Their names are listed in the book. So it's a weird lie or a weird falsehood to put out there on a big podcast when there are living people that are listed in the book that can tell that that's not true. And so it becomes very important to realize that he was on many podcasts doing this, throwing this around, and you've got to understand each of these people in the context of their history from the beginning of the pandemic until now and before. And I would suggest that that's the most important thing that we can do now with all of these people that are part of Team Worst Case Scenario is really pay attention to what they were doing before the pandemic, from maybe 2015 onward. Try to figure out what they did in these years before they became part of this limited spectrum of debate, which was seeded by a military-industrial complex that was pulling off the caper, the sting of a generation. And those people, Team Worst Case Scenario, are spectacularly committed to the lies that they've been telling for 5 years, and they are the health freedom movement that's in front of us now. The lies that they've told us is that there was a mystery virus that was responsible for the excess deaths. That's not true. They simply murdered people. If you look carefully at this graph, you will see at the bottom in light blue the average number of people every week that's dying of pneumonia. Those numbers tripled in the start of the pandemic due to a lack of antibiotic use, a lack of general treatment, the misuse of ventilators, and the misuse of supplementary oxygen. That's the bottom line. They murdered people and then told us that it was a novel virus that was spreading. The way that they achieved that was lying about what PCR could identify. And then they had to cover up the fact that there was no epidemiological evidence of spread. The way they did that is they put a couple, 3 people that did a lot of numbers and made them very, very big presentations of them, and they all ignored the population pyramid in the shape that it provides. We also have no lawyers that will argue on our behalf with any terms that mean anything in American law. And I am including Aaron Seary in that group of fake lawyers. Now, these people that I'm calling Team Worst Case Scenario revealed themselves most clearly in November of 2023 when they presented in Romania on stage together with none other than Stephen Hatfield, probably one of the worst people in my era of American history, one of the shadiest individuals that gets put in front of us regularly. Now, interestingly, all of these people saw the presentation of Denny Rancor, and Denny Rancor supposedly showed them that there was no epidemiological evidence of spread from the beginning of the pandemic, and none of these people came back from this talk to say that. Instead, they said that Denny Rancor showed us that 17 million people died from the shot, and that's all they said. Now, curiously, Denny didn't correct them, didn't care to correct them, still hasn't corrected them, and in fact, has never corrected anybody when they leave that part out since May of 2020. And that reveals him to me as a traitor. A lot of these people have been paid to hide this population pyramid bump. If you don't know what a population pyramid is, this is the population of the United States, for example, in year 2000, as described by males on one side and females on the other side, with age groups broken down here, 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, 15 to 19. And so you would display all 281 million people on a chart like this, and you can understand how many young people and how many middle-aged people and how many old people you have. Now, I hope you can see that for decades already, America has realized that there's a problem coming. There's going to be a lot of old people when these guys retire. There's going to be a lot of people on Medicaid and Medicare. There's going to be a lot of people that need end-of-life coverage that, as far as we do it right now in America, is about $500,000 for every 6 months that we keep them alive. It is essentially a problem in need of management, and there are other Western nations for which this problem was much more pronounced. Maybe now you can understand what they did in Scotland and what they did in the UK, what they probably did in America, what they did in Germany, what they did in all these places where there was a population pyramid problem that was aging out, coming up. Look at the border of the G and look how steady it is for all these years, and then watch it explode as these people age out. This is the problem that needed managing. This is the lie that is being spectacularly committed to. They have spectacular commitment to this lie. They told us that this rise in all-cause mortality was a novel virus. They told us that. Robert Malone, his wife, Jill Glasspool Malone, Harvey Reich, Jessica Rose, Ryan Cole, the guy from the Human Genome Project, Kevin McKernan, and Brett Weinstein, and all the people that have unwittingly gone along with their illusion of consensus are misleading our young, and they are part of the same team worst case scenario that got us here. This is the time. We can wake up right now and see it. If we want to, we can wake up right now and we can see it, that an overclass has put a highly trained set of acolytes in front of us to manipulate our habits and opinions on social media, to control the questions we asked, the answers we arrived at, and tricked us into believing a lot of nonsense.
What should be happening in the Biden administration right now that isn't going on?
And it's very easy for you to believe how Leana Wen might be one of these witting or unwitting participants in our governance by mythology, but it's harder. It's a lot harder for people to see that's also happening at CHD and ICANN.
Home tests available to all
unless you just put it right next to each other.
They are heavily going at us with raw milk going to kill you, blah, blah. And you just said you're not seeing any difference in the pasteurized milk.
Pasteurization is not designed to get rid of viruses.
So Brian Hooker of CHD is also telling us about viruses in our milk, and that pasteurization doesn't get rid of viruses, that viruses can pandemic, that there was a pandemic and it could have been gain of function. Despite the fact that he had me on staff for a year, despite the fact that I was able to explain it to him multiple times, he just is going along with it. I don't know why, but I know that's what's happening. And so if you want to save your children, you're going to have to do it yourself, because I know I've been trying for 5.5 years to help CHD score a touchdown on this, and they explicitly do not want to do it. I had Robert Malone, Merrill Nass, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Tess Laurie and Jessica Rose all to myself for an hour and explained this, and they ignored it for 3 more years. And nobody has ever been in this narrative by chance. That's what I have learned after struggling and arguing and begging people offline to listen, to understand, to consider how important this is, and them ignoring it. I've come to understand why. I thought it was just ignorance or egos or money, but it's not. It is a coordinated group of liars that is employed from the very, very beginning. This guy from the Human Genome Project is lying about somebody who came to my house, for goodness sakes. Pierre Corey, who lied about ventilation, lied about oxygenation, and lied about the suffocation of George Floyd. All in the first 6 months of 2020. No one is in this narrative by chance. That's why he didn't get on Weinstein or Rogan with Weinstein until a full year later. Because they needed to get everybody coerced into transfection and get as many people to accept it and take it as possible before the objection was made. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, these people are a problem for us. They're a problem for our kids. And this idea that these people have orchestrated now Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard to be put into positions of power is frightening, because it's starting to show, I think, the fact that there are no good guys. There are only people auditioning to be members of the governing elite, the overclass, the people that understand that there are curtains and there are stuff behind those curtains, and you get to see behind some of those curtains, but not other curtains. And the mouth breathers, the plebs, they just watch us on stage. And that's what you're going to see when I switch over to this hearing right now. You're watching people on stage. Some, and many maybe, are unwittingly participating in this theater, but there are many, many people who understand absolutely and totally that it is a theater. It is a theater that is enabled by the military social control program suite that we call social media. That's not the right switch. This one is the right switch. There we go. I will just assume that we didn't miss anything other than a bunch of show. And if we did, I don't think it really matters, because it's just theater.
I ask you a question. Please give me the courtesy of responding. You said the reforms now make you support it. What can you cite? Which reforms?
There are a number of reforms to include getting rid
in the new law,
that,
right?
that all of you and your wisdom.
Ms. Gabbard, my time is getting short, but I got to just tell you, after the reforms were passed into law in April of 24, you went on Joe Rogan's podcast in May. The bill is now law, and you said, quote, "This bill took an already bad problem and made it many, many times worse." Again, in my mind, this is a question of judgment. 702 is critical. I appreciate this late conversion, but I'm not sure I buy it, because you've had such a consistent position. Again, I know my colleague's going to raise these, but rather than standing up to dictators like Putin and Assad, you've sometimes amplified his talking points. I mean, I just do not understand how you can blame NATO for Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine. And when Assad used chemical weapons against his own people, you didn't condemn him, and I can go through all the quotes. You actually questioned Americans' intelligence. Now, you mentioned a lot about trust. And one of the things that I'm so proud on this committee is
No, I find it interesting, actually. I do think that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was also scheduled to have a hearing today, but I can't really find that video anywhere. And so I find myself kind of wondering what's up with that. I'm going to just refresh here to see if there's anything. Press for him and then him. So that's interesting to me, because Kash Patel also has his hearing is visible. but somehow or another we don't have anything for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So again, you can see that they point the cameras where they want you to be looking. They try very hard to control the thoughts that you have, where you put your attention. And so now they really want your attention here, because again, this is a ritual. This is designed to get you to accept the confirmation, and maybe not you, maybe it is to get the other side to accept, your family and friends or your neighbors to accept the nomination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the nomination of Kash Patel, the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard. And this theater is now no different than any other time that they've done it. But what, for me, is how I see it. I never could see it as clearly as I can see it now.
Intelligence, my responsibility would be to ensure the security of our nation's secrets and would not take actions to advocate for any actions related to Snowden.
Thank you.
So the answer is no. Is that correct? In 2020, you introduced the Protect Brave Whistleblowers Act, which would amend the Espionage Act to make it more...
It doesn't even make sense that this lady is in Congress. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Classified information. In particular, the bill would allow individuals to disclose even top secret information as long as it's not done with the specific intent to injure the United States or advantage any foreign nation. Your bill would also have created an affirmative defense if public disclosure of classified information were made for several reasons, one of which was to expose gross waste of funds. I strongly oppose this legislation, which would hamper our ability to prosecute people who give our adversaries classified information. So let me ask you this. Ms. Gabbard, do you still support providing individuals who have access to top secret information with the ability to make their own decisions regarding whether that information should be publicly disclosed, even though disclosure may cause tremendous harm to our country or our allies?
Senator, we cannot and should not have individual vigilantes within the intelligence community making their own decisions.
To the Pentagon. And Virginia got hurt very bad that day, and so did the nation. Just a couple of months ago, you posted this on your X account. On 9/11, it's hard to tell what is conspiracy theory and what isn't. I'd like to introduce that for the record, Mr. Chair. We take that kind of stuff pretty personally. Virginians know what happened on 9/11, and we don't need folks giving oxygen to conspiracy theories about 9/11. Now, one thing I noticed about this post is it was in July of 2024. It was 23 years after 9/11. You had a lot going on in your life. You were running for president then. What made you decide, in the midst of everything going on in this country, in this world, in July of 2024, in your own candidacy for president, that now was the time to say it's hard to tell what is conspiracy and what isn't about 9/11? What was so important about making this point in July of 2024?
Senator, the dramatic drop in trust in our government, and this is particularly one of the templates for that is what happened at CDC.
Yeah, no, I want to move aside from that. Because you say, you go on to say, I won't take sides. As president, I won't take sides on 9/11. Wow. I won't take sides on 9/11. Let me ask you this. As a general matter, do you find it hard to tell what is a conspiracy theory and what isn't? Is that kind of a general deficit that you find in your own analytical abilities?
My father told me when I was 13 years old, he said people in authority lie, and that the job of a citizen in every democracy is to maintain a fierce skepticism.
Okay, I get
of
it.
government authority.
And you're an authority, but you wouldn't take sides on 9/11, and you're admitting, I have a hard time telling what is a conspiracy theory and what isn't.
Senator, I haven't investigated it. If the things that I investigate, I take sides on. People are allowed to hold that opinion. I'm not going to tell them they're crazy for holding that opinion. I'm going to say, what is your evidence? And if I hear the evidence, I'm going to say, that doesn't make any sense.
So you won't take sides on 9/11. Wow. Senator Murray asked you some questions about Gardasil, and this is a vaccine that's manufactured in Virginia. There's other HPV vaccines. I'm going to enter into the record a whole series of studies from many, many nations to talk about the dramatic positive effect of Gardasil. Could I introduce those into the record, Mr. Chair?
Without objection. And those studies are on trial
let me ask
right
a question.
now.
Let me ask a question. These are studies from Scotland, Sweden, the UK, Australia, the United States, multiple studies. And then I'm going to introduce in the record, I guess it's a blog post of yours. The verdict is now inescapable. Gardasil is killing girls. And I'd like to introduce that into the record as well.
Without objection.
You have a pretty significant financial interest in litigation against Gardasil. You have received contingency fees and payments for referring people to lawyers suing the manufacturer. And in your ethics vetting...
I've never received any money from any Gardasil or any other vaccine lawsuit.
Let me read a quote. This is your words. In your ethics vetting for this nomination, you said, quote, pursuant to the referral agreement, I'm entitled to receive 10% of fees awarded in contingency cases referred to the firm. How can folks who need to have confidence in federal vaccine programs trust you to be independent and science-based when you stand to gain significant funding if lawsuits against vaccine manufacturers are successful?
I have given away all of my rights to any fees in that lawsuit.
I yield back.
Next is Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kennedy, good to see you again. Thank you for being here before the committee. One of the beauties of our country is we have foundational documents that point us in the right direction. I think it's the compass that shows us due north, true north. The Declaration of Independence mentions life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as unalienable rights. You and I had a serious conversation about the importance of life, and I'm a pro-life Christian, as you know. And you said that you assured me that your deputies were going to be pro-life. Is that still the case?
I will implement President Trump's policies. I serve at his pleasure, but I share President Trump's view that every abortion is a tragedy.
Now, my question was, are you having deputies within your at HHS that will be pro-life?
As I said, I can tell you exactly what I'm going to do, so there's no mistake. I'm going to implement President Trump's policies. President Trump has told me he wants to end late-term abortion.
Are you hiring people who are pro-life at HHS?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. During the first Trump administration, HHS began investing in policies to support individuals living with sickle cell anemia. This has continued. A career staff person has dedicated time to coordinate sickle cell disease-related activities across HHS and other government agencies. Will you commit to continuing to have an individual serve in this coordinating role for sickle cell?
Yes, and I think I've worked on sickle cell for many, many years. I told you I have many friends who have sickle cell, several of them. I've seen the suffering that they endure. 1 out of every 365 blacks in our country has sickle cell. There are now promising gene therapies. They're very, very expensive. But it's something that NIH should be enthusiastically supporting, that kind of research.
Well, you answered my second question, so that's great, which was today you noticed the FDA gene therapies are really breakthrough evolutions in science that are really one-time cures. So you support the continuation of the research that makes that more available?
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you. That's great news. This past fall, due to one facility making the majority of our IV drugs in the U.S., it was devastated by Hurricane Helene. Hospitals and healthcare facilities across the country faced IV shortages. Nephron Pharmaceuticals in Columbia, South Carolina, tried to shore up IV support in South Carolina hospitals by creating the Palmetto line in its facility to help make IVs for hospitals across the state. We must do more proactively to address the shortages and the shortage risks, as well as to provide and promote the production of medical products here in the U.S. If confirmed, how will you prioritize efforts to prevent and reduce drug shortages, including for essential medicines?
Including?
Essential medicines.
President Trump has told me it's his priority to bring essential medicine manufacturing back to this country. It's a national security threat, and so much of it has been exported abroad, and particularly to China. And it's a priority for him, so it's a priority for me as well.
Very good. Will you commit to fostering productive public-private partnerships that can provide the government with key information on pharmaceutical supply chains, help direct shortages, and improve the long-term security and resiliency of the U.S. drug supply?
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you very much. And one of the things that we study, I had two opportunities to question you. Once yesterday at the Finance Committee, I opted, as opposed to seeing you twice, just see you one time and spend my time doing some other things with that time. But I think it's important for us to recognize that we are in a critical place as a nation. We're so dependent on other countries for the essentials, from health care and beyond. And we ought to work on a strategy of resilience across this nation in all of the essential areas that we need to become less dependent on the rest of the world and more dependent on ourselves. And I hope that as your term at the HHS, you will spend a lot of time thinking through and all the layers and complexity that is under HHS, how we become more and more resilient as a nation.
That's absolutely critical for our national security and for our economy. And President Trump is doing that through HHS, but also, more importantly, through the Commerce Department.
That's a nice confirm RFK hat.
Directly with pharmaceutical industry
Confirm
leaders
RFK, it
to
says.
figure out what kind of incentives that they need to bring manufacturing home.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my 8 seconds.
And then we'll go to Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kennedy, thank you for joining us here today. Listen, credibility matters so much when you lead the most important health agency in the world. The Secretary of HHS has got to be trusted that he's telling the truth, that he cares about science, has no political agenda. Mr. Kennedy, I want to go back to some of your testimony yesterday before the Finance Committee when you either feigned ignorance about some very clear statements that you have made in the past, or you outright denied saying things about the vaccine program that you have undoubtedly said. And so with a day's hindsight, I want to give you another chance to be honest about the things that you have said. Senator Warnock asked you yesterday if you had compared America's vaccine program to the Catholic Church's pedophilia scandal. You said you never said that. Now, I'm not asking you to explain what you said.
I didn't say it. Never said that.
You didn't say that. Senator
I did
Warnock,
not say that I hadn't said that, Senator. I said the other question you asked me about Nazi death camps.
That's fine. You're doubling down on that. You said Senator Warnock also asked you if
doubling
you compared
down.
America's vaccine campaign to the Nazi death camps and the Holocaust. Again, you said yesterday you didn't say that.
I did not say that.
You did not say that. Senator Bennett asked you yesterday if you had made an allegation that AIDS is a different disease in Africa than it is in America. On that one, you said you didn't recall. Having had a day to think about it, do you recall saying that AIDS is a different disease in Africa than it is in the United States?
I looked up that passage in my book and found that indeed the diagnostics for AIDS are very different in Africa than in the United States, that the list of symptoms is almost completely different.
So I'll submit this for the record, but having denied the first two statements, let me just read what you said. You said in 2013, is it hyperbole to say that the people who run our vaccine programs should be in jail? They should be in jail. To me, this is like Nazi death camps. Look at what it does to the families who participate in the vaccine program. I can't tell why somebody would do something like that. I can't tell you why ordinary Germans participated in the Holocaust. I can't tell you what was going on in their minds. With respect to the pedophilia scandal, you said the pedophilia scandal in the Catholic Church is a perfect metaphor for what's happening in the United States. The vaccine program, it's the same reason.
Did you hear that, Mark?
That
is so. That's crazy. I just sent Mark an email this morning about banning in the Catholic Church. It's, oh my gosh.
I don't want an HHS secretary that's not going to question science. I think it's important to question science. But you're not questioning science. You've made up your mind. You have spent your entire career undermining America's vaccine program. You make these purposeful comparisons to those that are administering the vaccine program to the Nazi executioners, to the people who covered up the Catholic Church's pedophilia scandal, because you have made a decision that there is a comparison, that there is evil in the vaccine program as there was evil in the pedophilia scandal and the Nazi death camps. You aren't exploring science. You have made up your mind. You've spent your entire career trying to undermine these programs. It's the reason that these statements, these incredibly aggressive, over-the-top statements, matter to us is because it just isn't believable that when you become secretary, you are all of a sudden going to be consistent with science. People who have spent their career saying these kinds of things, running the kinds of campaigns that you have run, don't all of a sudden change their stripes. And so, Mr. Chairman, I will submit these statements.
Can I respond to that, Senator? Without objection. My statement about the Catholic Church is almost identical. The findings of the Government Oversight Investigation Committee and investigated CDC's vaccine program in 2003. Senator Burton was chairman of that committee. And he said that that certain individuals in that program had written off a generation of kids because of, quote, misplaced institutional loyalty to the CDC and because of entanglements with the drug company. Let me finish what I'm saying. You made some grave accusations.
Pedophilia to the administration of vaccines?
No, it wasn't pedophilia.
So it was a perfect metaphor.
Well, if you have 1 in 36 kids who has neurological injuries, and if that is, linked, that's something that we should study.
Is it a perfect metaphor?
It's not a perfect metaphor, but there's no metaphor that's perfect. But I am pro-vaccine. I am going to support the vaccine program. I want kids to be healthy. And I'm coming in here to get rid of the conflicts of interest within the agency, to make sure that we have gold standard evidence-based science. And if you show me where I'm wrong on this, show me a single statement I've made about science that is erroneous.
Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kennedy, welcome. I enjoyed our conversation last month in our office. And thank you for remembering, as you did again today, my uncles who we talked about, Morris and Lauren and Jean, who all have recently passed away from Parkinson's, grew up in a farm family. That was kind of you to remember them. So thank you for that. Let me start by asking you a question about children and the safety of children. President Biden's administration, his HHS, issued a rule, so it's binding, requiring that every doctor in America, including pediatricians who receive any kind of federal funding, so that's anybody who takes ACA funding, anybody who takes CHIP funding, this is almost every health provider in America, requiring them to conduct gender transition and gender so-called affirming procedures. So that means hormones, that means puberty blockers, that means surgeries in some cases. They imposed that rule on doctors across the country. This has been litigated, and it has been actually stopped by a couple of courts who found that it was way outside of HHS's jurisdiction. My question to you is, will you rescind this rule that imposes this radical policy, and talk about being anti-science, this radical policy on just about every pediatrician in the United States of America?
Yes, I will. And by the way, that rule is anti-science. The most thorough meta-review on gender-affirming care has come out in the Cass report, which reports really catastrophic impacts on children. And that is science. It's a meta-review of all the existing scientific studies. But, you know, even more just from a common sense, if you're a patient, do you really want somebody performing surgery on you who is morally opposed to that surgery? It doesn't make any sense. We need to embrace diversity in this country. Are people who believe that's important? I respect them. We should hear them out. We should debate. We should have a congenial conversation. But there are also people who believe that it is an atrocity, and they need to be listened to too. And we need to embrace diversity and make room for diversity in this country, and not force people to do things that are against their conscience.
And let me just point out that on this rule, what's particularly pernicious about it is we're talking about gender transition surgeries, gender transition care on minor children. This rule purported to preempt all state law. So in states like mine and many others, where the voters have said, we don't want gender transition procedures performed on minors, the Biden administration attempted to use federal money and force pediatricians to do it anyway. So I'm glad to hear you say you'll rescind that rule. I think it's terrific for the safety of children.
And Senator, I would add that we don't let children drink. We don't let them drive an automobile because they have bad judgment. They are flooded with hormones. Their brains are still in formation. Their sexuality is still in formation. To allow them to make judgments about that are going to have life-changing, forever implications for the rest of their life at that age is unconscionable, particularly in light of the Cass report.
I'm glad to hear you say that. Let me ask you a question about NIH research, if I may. I know this is something that you care a lot about. Under the first Trump presidency.
And I do want to add that people who have gender differences should be respected. They should be loved. And loving them is not.
The point here is, and I think they're missing the ball. I'm just going to interrupt them because I think this is so dumb. I think they're missing the main point here. The main point is they are misconstruing and mixing up and obfuscating the very clear differences between doctors who think that this is okay, who should be in jail, because any adult doctor that thinks it's okay to stop the puberty of someone under the age of 18 because that person under the age of 18, under their counseling, has decided to stop their puberty, that's not anyone who should be practicing medicine. And so we don't need to understand that in any other way other than that, because again, there is no biology and no biological basis for the idea that we have medicine or therapies or treatments that are capable of reversing the whatever is determined at birth. You want to call it the genetic determinism of a baby. You want to call it I don't care what you call it. What is done and is in process at the birth of a baby and is progressing through a trajectory through time, has a pattern integrity, cannot be usefully augmented by any therapy that we have to fundamentally change from one sex, male, to another sex, female. That's not possible. And it doesn't matter how early you do it. And so the fundamental thing to debate here is whether there is a question to ask, and there isn't a question to ask. We don't have a solution for that problem. Even if you believe it's a big problem or a small problem, we don't have a solution for pattern integrities which believe themselves to be on the wrong sexual development track. That's not possible.
I will implement President Trump's policies.
Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Sanders. Good morning, Mr. Kennedy. Look, I want to just take a moment because like a few of us on this dais, I sit on finance as well as help. And one of the things that was most disturbing to me about yesterday's hearing was the suggestion from some of my friends on the other side of the dais that our intense questioning and concerns about Mr. Kennedy were driven by partisanship. I have voted for 5 of President Trump's nominees to date in the last couple of weeks. One of them, the new Secretary of Transportation, was on the scene last night at DCA. Like all of us, I take really seriously our obligation for advice and consent. And I am concerned, as Senator Mullen expressed his concern, about the need for science to help us move forward on critical issues. Now, some of you are new to this committee and new to the Senate, so you may not know that I am the proud mother of a 36-year-old young man with severe cerebral palsy. And a day does not go by when I don't think about what did I do when I was pregnant with him that might have caused the hydrocephalus that has so impacted his life. So please do not suggest that anybody in this body of either political party doesn't want to know what the cause of autism is. Do you know how many friends I have with children who have autism?
Wow, that's...
The problem with this witness's response on the autism cause and the relationship to vaccines is because he's relitigating and churning settled science so we can't go forward and find out what the cause of autism is.
Wow, that's a bold
statement. Families.
Holy ships.
Mr. Kennedy, that first autism study rocked my world. And like every mother, I worried about whether, in fact, the vaccine had done something to my son. And you know what? It was a tiny study of about 12 kids. And over time, the scientific community studied and studied and studied and found that it was wrong.
I got to learn this voice.
And the journal retracted.
You got to keep it up all the time and never let it down. Because sometimes the science is wrong.
We build on the work.
You got to keep it up all the time.
Successful.
That's how you do it.
And when you continue to sow doubt,
just keep that up all the time. If you keep your voice up all the time, it makes really dramatic.
So that's what the problem is here. It's the relitigating and rehashing and continuing to sow doubt so we can't move forward. And it freezes us in place.
Yeah, it's really gross.
Let me move on
it's
to
really
my other
gross.
From yesterday's hearing.
Settled
During
science, my
yesterday's
ass.
Hearing, you really showed a lack of knowledge about Medicare and Medicaid. So what is Medicare Part A?
Medicare Part A is
is
for primary care.
Is cerebral palsy?
physicians.
Is cerebral palsy now autism? Is that what's going on here? Like, what happened there, by the way?
Is seniors coverage for inpatient hospital care? What's Medicare Part B?
For physicians and doctors, Medicare care Part D.
That is coverage for outpatient care and home health. So what is Medicare Part C?
Someone on YouTube said, yeah, but her nanny takes care of her kid. And that's a dark joke, but it's probably not far off. I mean, as she provokes tears as if she's not, come to deal with it now at this age.
Exactly. For seniors on Medicare. So, Mr. Kennedy, you want us to confirm you to be in charge of Medicare, but it appears that you don't know the basics of this program. So let's turn to Medicaid. No, I had to correct you on several things. Let's turn to Medicaid. Yesterday, you said
correct me. I didn't get it wrong.
Mr. Kennedy, my time is limited, and I
Oh,
hope the
wow,
chair
they're
will
all
give me a
so
couple
rich.
more minutes.
Senator.
Yes, Medicaid.
All right, because you're
Let's
giving me
turn
very
to
little time
Medicaid.
to answer one.
Let's turn to Medicaid. Medicaid, you said yesterday to Senator Cassidy, Medicaid is fully paid for by the federal government, and it's not fee for service. That statement is false. Do you now understand that that statement is false? Yes or no?
That Medicaid is paid for by the federal government. I believe that.
You said it is fully
Sorry,
paid
Jeff,
for.
that's
Medicaid, in fact, sir,
Well,
is
no,
a federal
the
state
the
partnership.
state has a partnership.
Right. So you were
That me using the word rich is like that's rich in terms of if you were really telling a story and you had all kinds of emotion to it, that's kind of what it means. I don't know, that's from a long time ago. That's like my college adjective palette there. I don't know, sorry about
but
that.
It is important to me to understand whether you believe that taking Medicaid away from 60,000 people in New Hampshire would make Medicaid better. And would it make New Hampshire healthy again? I'll submit that for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Tuberville.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy, for being here, being few months older than me. I'm going to be respectful to your elders.
Not by much.
Yeah, not by much. That's right.
This is the only accent I can really speak in
Look at this
American.
room. We hadn't had a full room.
We hadn't had a full room in a long time since I've been here 4 years.
Hearing. Thank you for bringing the light to what this is all about. It's about health in our country. There might have been a half a dozen people in the last Health and Human Services nominee. Nobody was interested. Lawyer who worked from home in California, didn't do a damn thing in terms of what we needed when COVID was full steam. So thank you. Thank you for getting our young people involved. My two boys, 28 and 30.
I don't know how many guys I know from my high school that used to talk like this, but it is really something. Like, it sounds like it's a great accent.
From the chemicals and the things that we have in our food. They're fired up about it. And you brought light to that. And thank God you've done that. You brought importance to what we're doing.
He could do like radio commercials.
You know, I coached for 40 years.
I'll tell you what.
In the last 4 or 5 years I coached, I'd never seen like the run on drugs our young people are being given by doctors across this country.
Yes, sir.
We have a attention deficit problem in this country.
Yes,
You know,
sir.
attention deficit, when you and I were growing up, our parents didn't use a drug, they used a belt and whipped our butt, you know, and told us to sit down. Nowadays, we give them Adderall and Ritalin. It's like candy across college campuses and high school campuses. Mr. Kennedy, what are we going to do about that?
Today, 15% of American kids are on Adderall. And there's clearly a major problem with overprescription, not just with our children, but with our entire population. We have 4.2% of the world's population, and we take 50% of the pharmaceutical drugs. And there's a recent study by Peter Ghosh, who is one of the founders of the Cochrane collaboration, that showed that prescription drugs are now the third largest cause of death in our country after cardiac arrest and cancer. We're not getting healthier. Americans are getting less and less healthy. 70% of pharmaceutical profits globally come from our country, which has 4.2% of the world's population. We're the only country that allows full-scale pharmaceutical ads on TV. And we're all being told you can make yourself, you can eat anything you want, you can smoke anything you want, you can do anything you want. And
what's he talking about?
You in the end. And it is not a good formula. And our kids are getting sicker and sicker. They're not getting better. Nobody here, all the people here who are defending this current system and defending these pharmaceutical industry profits, many of whom are taking huge amounts of money from the pharmaceutical industry, millions of dollars for many of these senators. And none of that, this is not making our country healthier. It's making us sicker. We need to get rid of these conflicts. We need good science, and we need good leadership that is able to stand up to these big industries and not bend over for them.
Thank you. And you brought to light
Moon
the vaccines
River.
over the last couple of years. I've had my first granddaughter here in a couple of weeks, and my son.
I made that
wife
joke at the
have
vet
done their
the other
research
day, and
about vaccines.
the lady that was
And,
handling Big
she's
Mike,
not gonna
she
be
actually got it. She started
pincushion.
laughing really hard.
We're not going to allow that to happen. But you brought that up, but as you and I talked about vaccines, Coach, let's empower scientists to do their job. You know, let's go by what they do. Let's don't just do something for the pharmaceutical company. So I appreciate you doing that. One other thing is you and I talked about red dye number 3, and just happened, you and I talked about that, and a few days later in this room we had the FDA director. And I asked him, why do we use red dye 3 in our cosmetics? Or we don't use in cosmetics, we use in our food, but we don't use it in cosmetics because it causes cancer. What in the heck's going on? Well, a few weeks later, because of your insistence, we dropped it. So tell me about dyes and things that you're concerned about, because I get more talk about that than anything.
We have 10,000 ingredients in our food in this country because FDA employs a standard called the GRAS standard that looks at any new chemical as innocent until proven guilty. In Europe, they have 400 ingredients in their foods. Kellogg's makes Fruit Loops for the United States alone It is loaded with red dye, blue dye, yellow dye.
The interesting thing for me about this, as a former employee of CHD and a longtime chaser of the truth over the last 5 years, is that we knew this before the pandemic. It was just something that nobody cared about because you would just assume that people had choice. And if you wanted organic food, you would buy it. And that if enough people bought organic food, then of course, agriculture and maybe even big ag would have to change over to organic. That's always been everybody's attitude in America. It's capitalism. It's the market. It will correct itself. And in fact, none other than Brett Weinstein just the other day, yesterday, on his own podcast, was advocating for that exact market mechanism to correct the problem we have in America, that people just have to force producers to change. We have to just start doing what we're not doing now and hope for the best. It is absolutely absurd to think that this is anything but an absolute seamless continuation of the theater that we have been under the spell of for decades.
The gold standard is, has found in studies, a gold standard is 12-step programs. You need an entire retinue, entire menu of treatments because many addicts will not respond immediately, at least to 12-step programs. And for many of them, Suboxone and other, and even methadone, are critical interventions that save lives, that get addicts off the street, and they should be available as a treatment option. I wouldn't describe them as gold standard, but I would describe them as medically necessary.
Well, this is something, look, I know we all take this very seriously in terms of the plight of opioid addiction in our country. And that's something that I hope we can recognize. We need to lift up more and more. I mean, NIH has said over and over again, not enough people are doing it. And in fact, an NIH published study does call it the gold standard of treating for opioid use disorder. You're on a mission against and fighting against chronic disease. You talk a lot about obesity. I wanted to get your thoughts if you support Wegovy, Ozempic, other similar types of GLP-1 drugs to fight obesity.
The GLP-1 drugs, the GLP drugs, the class of drugs are miracle drugs. But I do not think they should be the first frontline intervention for 6-year-old kids for whom they are currently. That is the standard of practice now. If every American who qualifies for GLP by being overweight, 74% of our population asked for them, and the federal government was paying for it, it would cost over $1 trillion a year. It would double the insurance costs for employers in this country, and it would be a tsunami. And they have a lot of side effects.
You said you support it, but that you don't see it being, the tool of choice for especially young kids.
Exactly.
I thought that the guy was from the community.
Absolutely.
I thought that was the Spanish teacher from Community for a minute there.
They shouldn't be prescribed alone without also prescriptions for exercise, because otherwise they eat away at muscle and they're counterproductive. They go after muscle first.
Yeah.
They have all kinds of bad side effects. About half the people on GLPs get off of them after 2 years, and then there's problems when you get off them. So
why not just recommend exercise first? Like, why is he not going all the way there? What's going on here?
Statements you made in the past. In the past, you said, quote, Wi-Fi radiation does all kinds of bad things, including causing cancer. Do you still stand by that statement?
Yes, or I won a case in front of the Court of Appeals against the FCC on that very issue.
And 5G, do you feel the same way about 5G?
Well, I'm just saying electromagnetic radiation does.
And RF, you think, causes. Another issue that comes before your work, if you were to be confirmed.
And let me just clarify that. It changes DNA, and there are scientific studies that have linked it to cancer, many of them. But it does other things that are, including neurological injury, that are kind of the other frontline injuries that we're most concerned about and that are best documented.
One other issue that comes before your work, if you're confirmed, I wanted to ask if you would support and continue and expand CDC's role in collecting and disseminating data on firearm mortality in the United States, something that...
I believe that the we need to study the causes of mass shootings. We need to study all the causes.
When it came to, you said earlier in response on avian flu, you would continue the investments, that you would support vaccine development. I just want to clarify, does that mean you support investments in mRNA vaccine research and development?
I'm not going to pick a vaccine right now. I need to look at all the data. I need to look at safety data and efficacy data, but I'm going to continue research on every kind of vaccine.
Mr. Chair, I yield back.
That was bad.
Thank you, Senator Kim. And now
Oh, wow,
Senator
that
Ring.
was really
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kennedy,
Swing and a
Trump just
miss.
won a historic election victory, and you were a big part of it. At the outset, we're going to talk about those Maha Moms, that coalition that you led, that movement that was
Wow,
behind
that
you,
is
supported
remarkable.
President Trump on Election Day, giving him one of the biggest electoral college votes in my lifetime.
It's just
You were a part of that.
electromagnetic
The voters
radiation. It has nothing to
voted
do
for
with lipid
President Trump.
nanoparticles or
President Trump, by the way,
cationic
is a man
lipids
of
or
his word. He always
transfection in the
follows through on
expression
what he
of
says
foreign
he's going to do.
proteins
And
in
one
our
of the things that he
cells.
said he
Nothing
was
to do
going
with that
do
at all.
was put you front
Wow.
and center in this administration to make America healthy again. And that's why, at the end of the day, a lot of those moms have been here yesterday and today from Indiana to support you
What's
in
that
this
link?
movement. And that's why you have my full support. And
Oh, yeah.
anything other
Nice.
than voting for you to confirm you would be thumbing my nose at that movement, the millions of people in this country who want us to focus on making America healthy again. One of the things I've thought a lot about, I serve on the Armed Services Committee as well. I just left another hearing with the nominee to be our new Secretary of the Army, is the national security risk of an obese nation. 70% of our kids are not eligible today to serve in the United States military. And the Army 2 years ago.
Now, as a basketball coach in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, the same high school where Matthew Crooks matriculated and graduated in 2022, the guy who is supposedly the guy who shot at Donald Trump about 30 miles north of here. That is quite true. There are still athletes and there are still kids who are in shape. But the ones that are out of shape are extraordinarily out of shape. If you go to a high school band concert, and I try to remember back to my high school band, try to remember back to my high school pom-pom squad, my high school cheerleaders, my high school girls basketball team, because that's what you pay attention to when you're a teenage boy. And then try to put myself in that situation with my son as a freshman at his high school. It's remarkable. It is absolutely remarkable. There are girls in his class that weigh significantly more than he does. And that shouldn't really be when he's a 6'1" kid. It is, whoa.
We have to study the addicts. We have to end the conflicts of interest on the nutrition panels and on the drug panels that are loaded with people who have corrupt entanglements with the industries they're supposed to regulate, that have turned these agencies into sock puppets.
That's correct. The parents are the same. The parents have
somebody who can come in.
The parents have also not exercised in 40 years, and unfortunately have eaten poorly, and unfortunately didn't have the genetics that I had, where, I didn't put on the weight like a lot of people do. I have this gene. I'm a little bit different, and that's lucky. But for people that can store the energy, can store the fat, can put it away, these people, they have years of bad habit to reverse. I just see kids come into my gym with their parents, and their parents, they put shoes on and stuff so that they can walk around and encourage their kid. But it's kind of scary if you were to consider, okay, how long would it take that person to get back into shape? And it could be like years and years of consistent work in order to get back into any reasonable shape. But it's frightening, ladies and gentlemen.
From China. And even more of our generic drugs come from China. It's a public health.
All of our PCR tests for the first 2 years, all the lateral flow tests that were used to define the pandemic came from China for...
This is a huge priority for President Trump. He sees this as perhaps our greatest national security vulnerability. And over the past few years, so much of our essential medicines, the production of them and the supply chains have been exported to China. And it's a crisis now in our country. If there is a pandemic, if there is a war, if there's any conflicts, China will now be able to ransom American health. And that is not a good situation. We need to bring that production home. And President Trump is committed to doing just that.
Well, sir, I think you're going to have a tough job. You have my full support, but
I mean, people aren't even boiling their own rice anymore. You know, this is really a disturbing aspect of things. We only eat food that we prepare. We eat cookies that my son bakes. You know, it's unfortunate, but there are yes, whole generations of children are being raised from boxed and bagged food.
And Ranking Member Sanders, Mr. Kennedy, during our meeting, you shared your vision for the department, and we discussed priorities important to my home state of Delaware. But I must say, as a former cabinet secretary,
is that true? Even oxygen made in China? There's no way that's true. Is that true? Somebody on YouTube said that even the oxygen was made in China.
Deeply concerned and shocked by your apparent lack of understanding.
I do know that the ship Comfort that was brought to New York City in 2022 actually had an oxygen plant on it, and they showed on the news people pushing carts of green tanks away from it. So that's for sure.
And today,
and oxygen kills.
Details about Medicare and Medicaid. You didn't know what authorities you have under the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, known as EMTALA. And
there's lots of things that you learn on a job. This is also just theater. If you were hired as a CEO of a company, you wouldn't need to know everything right away. Of course, all the people under you would brief you, and that would put them into positions of power for a little bit as you transitioned into leadership, and that would be a way for them to earn your respect and your trust. And so that's how this always works. This is just dumb.
You did not seem to know anything about EMTALA, even though I raised it with you during our meeting last week. So I'll give you another opportunity. Yes or no, do you believe that a person presenting to an emergency room with a severe illness should have any type of emergency care needed to save their life?
Any American who the
yes
law
or no?
says.
Yes.
I'm answering the question. Any
yes
American.
or no was the
any American. So on the hospitals in Norway, it says irrespective of how you got into Norway, all healthcare in Norway is free. Now, they have a ton of money and only 7 million people, and they're way up in north, so it doesn't matter. But this is the kind of debate that Bernie Sanders was trying to create too. I don't think healthcare is a human right. I'm sorry. I think healthcare is a human responsibility. It is the responsibility of every human to provide shelter and food and safety to themselves and to the ones that they love. And that's the primary. What else are you responsible for if not for that? And so if healthcare and treating yourself becomes unnecessarily expensive because of malevolent aspects of society, that's something different. But what they're talking about here, human rights, is a enchantment that starts to trick adults and children into believing responsibilities are actually things that the outside world owes you already from birth. And that's nonsense. Other than a fair shot, that's all you're owed. That's it. And even that's not guaranteed. But goodness sakes, healthcare, a human right? Let's start with the right to, provide for your family and to, holy cow.
Yourself saying, I'm a Kennedy Democrat. I believe in labor unions. I believe in a strong, robust middle class. I believe in racial justice. And just yesterday and today, during this hearing and the hearing yesterday, you said we need to respect diversity. Mr. Kennedy, the Trump administration recently issued an executive order that directs the federal government to eliminate grants, contracts, policies, programs, and activities that include diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. This executive order has already caused widespread confusion, fear, and uncertainty for healthcare providers, researchers, public health professionals, and service providers across the country. You said in our meeting that you understand that health disparities exist. So yes or no, do you, in your view, do the following programs count as health DEI programs? Programs that target Black women to address the maternal mortality crisis?
Senator, there are 7.
Yes or no?
I'm not going to answer that yes or no. If you want an answer, I'm happy to give it to you, but it's not a yes or no.
I just want a yes or no.
I just want a yes or no.
Yes or no answer. Well, if you want to hear an answer, Senator.
Let me shift this because I only have 36.
If you want to hear an answer, Senator, I'm very happy to give you one.
I've got now 33 seconds. And there are people out here who want to understand that if they are at a pride parade and they're a healthcare provider, can they give out a brochure?
If you want people to understand, let me answer the question. If they are trying to have a program
in a Black church that is on Martin Luther King Day, will they be able to have that program? Will it be funded? Will they get in trouble? Will they be fired? That's the cause and concern. We all know that it is important that we have a healthy country. But
you want me to answer the question, Senator?
I think I got my answer.
Okay.
Thank you, and I yield back.
What's the clapping? Those people are so dumb.
There are 7.
They probably also waited for hours to clap.
NIH that protect minority health and that seek to eliminate this is the shocking and unacceptable disparities in minority health. I believe in helping all people who are vulnerable. DEI programs that President Trump eliminated have spent $63 million with no discernible positive impact on human health in this country. There's institutions already that existed before President Biden, whose job it is to do just that.
Will you cut those programs that you just referenced?
That decision is up to Congress, not to the HHS Secretary.
Thank you. I yield back.
For the record, treating a miscarriage or ectopic pregnancy is not an abortion. It's just false. And so I would ask that not be,
who he gave him
since
the
I'm
finger.
Not into misinformation, I would ask that misinformation not continually be repeated. Senator Husted.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kennedy, thank you for thank you for the work that you have done to create awareness about the food we eat and how it affects our health, particularly with our children. You have helped put that on the American agenda, rightfully so, and I appreciate that. I want to share with you a few statistics. According to the CDC, obesity prevalence is around 42% among adults with lower incomes compared to 31% among higher income individuals. That the relationship is strong among women. 45% of low income women are obese compared to 29% of higher income women. And I know I have had this conversation over the course of my public service career many, many times because at the states we run the Medicaid program, that it impacts those health statistics, that obesity impacts our programs, the cost of them, the quality of life of the people who are served. And I also get this question about why in the world does the federal government continue to subsidize programs that lead to unhealthy foods, and why do we operate programs in the way that we do, like with SNAP, that pays for foods that we know are causing people to be unhealthy? And I know you don't have the sole authority in this matter. The Department of Agriculture and the Congress is certainly it has an impact on that. But could you just shed some light on how you see your role in trying to impact that? Because we see that these policies are disproportionately affecting poor people, and the inability to change them and make America healthy again is having a disproportionate effect not only on them, but the cost of all of these programs we're trying to maintain.
Thank you for the question, Senator. The NIH has been diverted into away from studying the etiology of chronic disease. So there's almost nothing at NIH, very, very little, a low percentage of its budget, a $42 billion budget that is devoted to finding out why we're having this obesity epidemic. We know it's an environmental toxin. Epidemics are not caused by genes. That genes may provide a vulnerability. You need an environmental toxin. Why aren't we devoting science to finding out what those toxins are and then eliminating them? And, you know, this just, the focus is on infectious disease, and we almost altogether ignore chronic disease, which causes 92% of the deaths in this country. And during COVID, we had the highest death rate of any country in the world. We had 16% of the COVID deaths. We only have 4.2% of the world's population. No country did as poorly as us. And you ask CDC, why is that? They say because we are the sickest people on earth. The average person who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases. American blacks were dying from COVID greater than almost any population in the world, about over 3,000 deaths per million population. The only people worse are Indian reservations, which have an even higher rate. And the only person who did worse globally were Samoans. We had the American blacks were disproportionately impacted because they disproportionately have diabetes, obesity, cardiac illnesses, and other chronic disease. We need to start studying those, and we need to get rid of the conflicts in the agency that obstructs those studies, and that that are focused on advancing the mercantile interests of the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry rather than the health of the American people.
Well, I would ask you to take, if confirmed, to take a leadership role across agencies to advise us on what policy changes we must make to both not make it worse, but to make it better. Because we subsidize, literally, we have policies as a government that encourages the production of foods and the sale of foods, particularly our poorest Americans, that lead to these problems. We are literally creating the problem that we're trying to solve, and your recommendations would be very much appreciated.
We already have liaisons with the USDA, with Brooke Rollins, so that we can, with whom I have a very good relationship, so that we can work collaboratively to reduce the chronic disease and the exposures that are causing them.
Thank you.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Kennedy, Bobby. We share a mutual oldest best friend, and I respect that affection that you have for him very, very much. You did talk a little longer in your introduction, so I'm going to try to urge concision, because I've got 3 or 4 questions. As I said when we met, I'm still very concerned about the issues around vaccination. But I thought I'd start with the ability of Medicare to negotiate drug prices, which was finally okayed in 2022. We'll save Medicare plan $100 billion in the next 10 years, probably $1.5 billion out of consumers' pockets, Medicare patients, in just 2026 alone. Yesterday, you said that the Trump administration had issued a statement to lowering the cost of prescription drugs and continuing the negotiation program. I went back and looked at that, and it was a statement that mentioned increasing transparency and then said they would solicit feedback on the Medicare drug price. But nowhere did it say in the statement that the administration was actually going to commit to lowering prices. So is that something you still feel that negotiation program and lowering those prices is important?
I've spoken to President Trump about negotiations. He's absolutely committed to negotiating lower drug prices.
Great. I appreciate that. You've also spoken much on the need to focus on prevention of chronic disease, which I think everyone shares. The MAHA movement is alive in Colorado as well as everywhere else. People are frustrated by the fact that for every dollar we spend on healthcare in this country, and it has been previously said, it's often double any other country, only a nickel goes to prevention. So when you look at that $100 billion that's going to be saved over the next 10 years through the negotiation of pharmaceuticals, do you have any ideas of how we could put that towards prevention, that revenue?
Well, that's a really good question, Senator Hickenlooper. there's two things. There's two.
I'm going to give you 40 seconds because I've got two more questions.
We can do Medicaid, Medicare, and Obamacare should be we should be moving to value-based care, which includes prevention. And then the other arm is at NIH, CDC, and FDA, which should identify the toxins that are contributing to chronic disease and eliminating them.
Great. Another short question with mifepristone, which has been described and discussed a lot already. And I understand your commitment to follow the policy of the president. But he has other tools at his behest. If there needs to be another study or looking at the other existing studies, will you make sure that there's no bias to the best of our human ability to twist those results in any way to support that policy? And I'm speaking now just about the defense of science to make sure that those
Senator, I will commit
fair.
to you here today to review prior to approving any study at NIH to allow you to approve the protocols and the researchers and help us choose the research. All I want is good science. And I would love input from this committee on any study that we do. There's many ways that studies are flawed, and you can correct those at the outset in a lot of ways. So absolutely, I will work with you to make sure that it's science that you're satisfied with and I'm satisfied with.
That shows that this is the first time you're being considered for a cabinet position, because no other person would ever solicit and willingly approve our participation.
Well, I'm going to make that commitment. I know the hazard of it, but I'm going to do it anyway.
I'll hold you to it. Now let me get to the vaccines, and I think this is crucial, because I think there is widespread distrust and increasing distrust in the scientific community. I am a scientist. Some have argued that I'm the only scientist in the Senate left that is actually, I've written research papers in peer-reviewed journals. I think I understand how it works, and it is a healthy skepticism is useful, but we want to make sure that's a healthy skepticism. And yesterday in the discussion about Lyme disease, you said that in your discussion that it was formulated to be a militaristic bioweapon, that you had heard that in 3 books, but you hadn't read through. And I think at a certain point, if you're going to be an activist or some people would say a prophet, that what you say becomes
a prophet
promoting something, promoting
wow.
an idea. And I think when you've only read 3 books, or little bits of the 3 books, not the whole 3 books, isn't that reckless? I mean, isn't that there's something about? Aren't you then promoting this anti-science, the conspiracy about Lyme disease in this case, but the same thing about some of these vaccine issues?
Like I said, I never endorsed the issue. I said it's out there. For me not to acknowledge that is a form of manipulation. For me to say there is no question here, the government proclaimed orthodoxy is true. Anybody who believes it is a dissident.
I'm going to have time, and I appreciate the things. I just leave it that just because we do have one out of 36 kids that, again, we can't explain what it was. It's not fair to put that blame onto all kinds of things, but focus on vaccinations. I yield back.
Dr. Moody, Senator Moody, I'm sorry.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sitting down with me and spending so much time with me in my office. It has been an overwhelming week. I am the junior-most senator on this committee, and certainly you treated me no differently than the chairman, and I'm grateful to you for that. One of the topics we spent a long time talking about was your assurance and knowledge and understanding that it was the states that, in fact, gave limited power to the federal government and not the other way around, and your assurance that you will not use your agency or any organization that falls under your leadership to interfere with the state's ability to set policy or any autonomy of the state to enact or enforce laws that protect the lives of the unborn. I think that that is a concern of many. It was certainly one of mine, and you allayed those concerns, and I appreciated you spending so much time with your assurances. I want to turn to some of the discussions regarding many, which would say the government and health professionals did great harm to science and medicine in the wake of COVID-19. America, I believe, is at a crossroads where unfortunately things that used to not be particularly political, like science and medicine, are now politicized to the point where reality is distorted. What you believe has little to do with truth or facts and everything to do with your party. My hope is that you, Mr. Kennedy, and President Trump's other appointees will break this cycle that is threatening America and destroying its promise. Certainly, while I was the Attorney General of Florida, I had the responsibility in numerous areas to seek
The Attorney General
bring
of
justice.
Florida, incredible.
Working with Governor DeSantis and other leaders, we launched grand jury investigations. And I want to bring your attention to one of those grand jury investigations that dealt with COVID-19 and the actions of government officials and Big Pharma. And remember that a grand jury investigation is made up of lay people, 18 in this instance that were brought from different communities in Florida. And I just want to read into the record one paragraph for your consideration. Much of the goodwill by the COVID-19 vaccines was squandered in the following years as sponsors and federal regulators collaborated to push out booster after booster based on shallow, inaccurate safety and efficacy data, sidelining their own ombudsman to get doses of these vaccines into the arms of every American, regardless of their underlying risk from the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Erstwhile gatekeepers became cheerleaders as federal regulators, with the trust of the American people, dragged their feet in publicly confirming important safety signals, and then sanctioned long delays in mandatory post-marketing studies involving those very same signals. Sponsors abused the scientific journal system and regulatory reporting requirements, delaying public disclosure of serious adverse events from their clinical trials for years, and I could go on. Mr. Kennedy, as Secretary of Health and Human Services, will you use your position to squelch medical or scientific views with which you disagree?
Never. And, you know, and this is relevant to what Senator Hickenlooper was asking me. We've tried this system where government lies to Americans, or where they tell them about it, that they have it with a level of assurance that they don't feel themselves, and it isn't working. The initial COVID vaccine, Americans flocked to get it. I think 95% of Americans went and got it. The CDC has now recommended an 8th booster, and only 23% of Americans at most are taking it. It's because 77% of Americans no longer trust CDC. That's not a good thing. If we want uptake of vaccines, we need a trustworthy government. In other nations where they don't have mandates, like Japan and a few years ago in Germany, they had the same uptake as we did, without any mandates, because people trust their government. That's what I want to restore to the American people and the vaccine program. I want people to know if the government says something, it's true. It's not manipulative.
And
it's not a noble truth, which is what a certain doctor called his lies.
Certainly, I don't have a lot of time, but I would like to bring your attention to another grand jury investigation that we did in Florida, and I would ask Mr. Chairman to enter into the hearing record 2 grand jury reports related to human trafficking and COVID-19. To have your commitment that any organization under your purview will work with the states, not impede our investigations, to ensure that children that are in this country, that are minors, that are under your purview, that you will communicate with us so that we can have the information to make sure that they are safe, unlike in an investigation where Biden blocked us in this administration at every turn to keep us from getting information showing that they trafficked children that were brought into this country and lost dozens, tens of thousands of children, lost track of them, and never gave us in DCF in Florida the information so that we could protect them. To have your word that you will protect children if you're given that responsibility.
Absolutely. And President Trump is determined to find the 300,000 children who were lost over the past 4 years and to return them to their parents.
That's it.
Thank you.
Without objection, it can be entered into the record. Senator Markey.
Thank you. Yesterday, under oath, you told my colleagues on the Senate Finance Committee that when you went to Samoa in June of 2019, it, quote, had nothing to do with vaccines. Will you confirm again today that the trip had nothing to do with vaccines?
My purpose in going down there had nothing to do with vaccines.
Well, I have in my hand
a blog post.
Here
in
we go. It's
2021
gonna burn him. Oh boy!
in which you say
Here comes the gotcha.
anti-vaccine group Children's Health Defense, which you ran, offered to fund the purpose of the trip to Samoa. And in the same post, you state that the trip was ultimately arranged by an anti-vaccine activist. And during the trip, you met with an activist who later compared vaccine mandates to Nazi Germany. And during that trip, you also discussed vaccines with the Prime Minister and the Director General of Health of Samoa. The Director General of Health said you specifically discussed your views on vaccine safety fears. And with unanimous consent, I will submit those blog posts, Mr. Chairman, into the record.
Without objection.
Can I
I'm going to
reply
ask
to
you
that,
again.
Senator?
I'm
Can I
going to ask
reply,
you.
Senator?
I'll ask you again. Did the trip have nothing to do with vaccines,
Nothing.
as you told my colleagues on
Nothing
Senate
to do
Finance
with
Justice?
vaccines. And if you want me to explain, I will.
Did it have anything to do with vaccines?
No, it did not.
It did not. Well,
My purpose in the trip was not to. I ended up having conversations with people, some of whom I never intended to meet.
well, again, an anti-vaxxer helped finance your trip.
Well, you call them an anti-vaxxer. That's not what they would call themselves. They call themselves safe vaccine advocates. I went down there, a CHD, which was that group.
It's a whole semantic war.
Offered $6 million to obtain a grant for $6 million to install to digitalize the health records of Samoa.
Well, let me just go on.
To digitalize the health records of Samoa. To digitalize the health records of Samoa. To digitalize the health records of Samoa.
CDC declared a measles outbreak in Samoa. And in November, Samoa started a mass vaccination campaign to stop the outbreak. That same month, November of 2019, after 16 people had already died from the outbreak and Samoa was trying to respond to the crisis, you sent a letter to the Prime Minister of Samoa stating that, quote, it is a regrettable possibility that these children are causalities of the vaccine. By unanimous consent, I will introduce that letter into the record.
Without objection.
So as Samoa was trying to contain the outbreak, you were saying that it was the fault of the vaccine rather than the absence of vaccinations that caused the outbreak in Samoa in the same year you visited Samoa.
And I replied to that, Senator.
Let me just finish. The death count in Samoa grew to 83. And ultimately, volunteers in New Zealand sent tiny coffins to help bury the dozens of children who died. And the Samoan Director General of Health later said, with his last name,
he said tiny coffins.
and the status attached to it, people will believe him. People will believe Robert Kennedy. And a New Zealand vaccinologist later said the impact of your role was devastating. So your name and your profile helped fuel a measles outbreak. You scared people from taking a vaccine. It slowed the public health response, and children died. You've taken no responsibility thus far. And if an outbreak occurs in the United States, I have no evidence that you would not use your role as secretary to spread dangerous misinformation. So that one incident, from my perspective, disqualifies you from holding any position in healthcare, much less the #1 health official in the United States. And 75 Nobel Prize winners in science have said very clearly that you should not be confirmed, that it would be dangerous for you to have.
And you should look at their
job.
conflicts, Senator.
You
should look at their conflicts of those individuals.
Well, 75
and
Nobel.
you should look at who financed that letter.
75 Nobel Prize winners, and by the way, of a high percentage of the medical community in Boston, the health capital of the United States and the world, have said the same thing about your qualifications. They're saying to me they don't want tiny coffins as well. Neither do I. So that's the basis of
They don't want tiny coffins, he said.
Of my reservations about you, and the reason why I'm going to vote no on your candidacy, because I just think it's too dangerous to run the threat that that misinformation is spread in the same way it was in Samoa.
Senator Murkowski, and let me compliment Mullen and Murkowski. They've
I
stayed
waited
the
for
entire
hours so
conference.
I could clap in the
They're not
background.
obligated to, like the two of us, not that we wouldn't have otherwise. But Senator Murkowski, you please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think these are exactly the types of forums that we all need to be engaged in from start to finish, because
handsome woman.
there has been there's been considerable discussion here about many issues. Certainly a lot about vaccines. I care deeply about making sure that our vaccines are safe, the efficacy of them, the availability of them, how we disseminate them is particularly important in a very, very rural state like mine. You have experience there. You understand that. I am particularly attracted by the focus on chronic diseases. We know that if we can do a better job with chronic diseases, maybe some of the other things that we are susceptible to in the infectious diseases area, we're able to perhaps pull back a little bit on that. But our reality is, in order to make this country healthy again, it is a focus on everything. It is the prevention. It is the necessity of coming up with these life-saving vaccines that are going to be so critically important. It is
life-saving vaccines.
It is food. It is exercise. It is all of the above. And we got to figure it out together. We do need to shake some things up, but we also need
life-saving vaccines.
Need to give a level of confidence. And this is what I'm hearing from so many of my colleagues who have raised the issue of vaccines. We have made some considerable gains in my state of Alaska with vaccinating the many people in very rural areas where one disease outbreak can wipe out an entire village. We saw this in 1918 with the Spanish flu, and that's why everyone was rattled to the core. Villages were shut down entirely during COVID because of the fear of transmission. And so they're looking for these life-saving ways and means. And so when there is a lack of confidence, when there is a doubt, it's like, well, what do I do? And so we're pulling back then on, again, these areas where we can work to prevent.
I blame vaccines for overpopulation. Overpopulation is because we have vaccines. If we didn't have vaccines, there wouldn't be a population problem, dang it.
In my state, like Hep A and B and meningitis.
It's like a catch-22. You get vaccines, everybody lives, you have vaccines, now there's no population problem. I don't know how we're going to figure it out.
In the peninsula in Alaska about a measles outbreak. So we can't be going backwards with our vaccinations that will allow for this level of prevention and protection. So I'm asking you, you are clearly an influencer. You are clearly an influencer. You would not be in this position today.
Please use your influence for good, Mr. Kennedy.
Your podium, your platform, your voice can influence so many. So I am asking you on the issue of vaccines specifically to please convey with a level of authority and science, but also with a level of conviction and free of conflict and free of political bias, that these are measures that we should be proud of as a country.
Pamela, you're so old. You remember the Brady Bunch episode about it. Come on.
Was able to do with the COVID vaccine. It was extraordinary, and it did save lives. I need time for a question, so I'm asking you to focus on how you can use your position to provide for greater levels of confidence to the public when it comes to these life-saving areas. So I'm going to pivot to
She's still not done. Oh.
This relates.
I can answer that one.
No, I know, but I have 43 seconds, and no one has talked about our native populations. When you look at our health statistics, whether it's Alaska Natives or whether it is American
We're going to share all that data with Memorial Sloan Kettering. Didn't you hear the announcement?
Are not where they need to be. And it's in all categories. It's infectious disease, it's tuberculosis, it's hep C, it's mental health, it's depression, it's substance use.
Largest
it's sexually
tuberculosis
transmitted
outbreak
diseases,
ever
it's
in America,
hypertension,
I think,
stroke.
is on the news right now.
It is so deep, and it is so challenging, and it is so hard. You have received support from Native American tribes. You have been in these areas. You have been quoted, and I'd like for your comment on this, as quoted saying, as far as budgeting for Indian country, you said you would immediately triple the budget to support tribes. Can you expand on this pledge and the commitment? Because this is an area where we have truly left our Native people behind when it comes to their health and their health outcomes.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And this is an issue, as you and I talked about, that is very important. It's always been a priority for me. I spent 20% of my career working on Native issues. I was one of the founding editors of Indian Country Today, which is the biggest Indian newspaper. My father and uncle, Ted Kennedy, my father, were deeply, deeply critical of the functioning of the Indian Health Service back in 1968 to 1980, and nothing's changed. Nothing's gotten better. I'm going to bring in a Native at the Assistant Secretary level. I'd like to get him actually designated as a Assistant Secretary for the first time in American history. Make sure that all of the decisions that we make in our agency are conscious
I'm not Native
of
American.
the impacts on the First Nations. I've spent a lot of time in your state. It's my favorite place to go.
I could have really got there. Darn it. Assistant
Representing the
Secretary.
people up in Arctic Village, and been all over the state in the remote areas. I understand in Alaska the unique needs of Alaska because of remote health care, because some of these areas are not even accessible except for
They
airplane.
pressured them. They pressured them
They
into
don't have
accepting the
ambulance
transfection
services that the
scam.
federal government needs to pay attention
Don't
to,
underestimate how much pressure
finance
there
and
was to keep their
transportation, the
funding, to
unusual
get
ways that are
extra
required
funding.
there.
They probably gave them a lot of
now
extra
we really
money.
need to focus on telemedicine and AI. Make sure that even in remote
Those are
places
samples they
in
needed.
Alaska,
You see that, right? They needed those
Native
samples
people
more
can
than
get
anything else. That's why they went there. That's also why they went to colleges
on those
first.
issues and others.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Murkowski sets the record for going over. Senator also Brooks.
Sorry.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kennedy, I was struck by your comments during our meeting last week.
Bernie.
I was struck by your comments in our meeting last week where you made it abundantly clear to me that you intended to clean house of the professional science.
It's like they're all doing a bad Condoleezza Rice impression.
which
I mean,
you know
come on.
is headquartered in the state of Maryland.
Thought one of these ladies would be rocking a more traditional fro or something. Like this is
I
crazy.
believe in scientists, and I believe in doctors, and I trust them over politicians without medical degrees. You talked about bad science and bad scientists, and in fact, you specifically said to me in response to my question that you intend to replace the bad scientist with the good scientist. And so I want to ask you, in your opinion, what makes a scientist or a doctor qualified to serve at the National Institutes of Health?
Wow.
A scientist who's devoted to empirical methodology, to evidence-based science, scientists who understand the importance of replication, the importance of publishing raw data and being open and transparent about it, the importance of publishing peer review. We have, NIH has overseen over the past several years the precipitous decline in American health. There's 91,000 people at HHS, and are you suggesting that some of them should not be held responsible for that decline? They were in charge of protecting our health.
Let me just insert here.
Let me just finish.
But let me just say
saying
this, because I only have 3 minutes left. I don't set the rules here, but I ask the questions. And the question is really whether you intend, as you said, to substitute essentially your judgment for the judgment of these professional scientists and doctors.
I'm not going to substitute my judgment for science. Of course, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do, listen, the New York Times just did an article last week talking about the fraud, the 20-year fraud, 800 fraudulent studies produced by NIH. on amyloid plaques and not allowing any other hypothesis about the cause of Alzheimer's
Well, how
to be
will you
explored.
decide, Mr. Kennedy, which scientists
The ones
are
who
bad
are-
scientists?
the ones
Are
who
they the ones who disagree with you?
The ones who are corrupt, the ones who have been doing science like the amyloid plaque studies that were fraudulent.
Well,
We
these
should
doctors,
not.
let me ask you a question. Do you have a medical degree?
Do I know?
Okay, let me go to the next question. The Heritage Fund has compiled a watch list of federal employees to go after federal staff. Is there a watch list for federal staff at HHS?
Don't forget that we're doing this
Not that I
together
know
for
of.
fun.
Have you or has anyone in the administration developed
Doesn't
a
it
list
feel
of
like
career
it?
scientists or federal staff that you would target for termination?
50 people on Twitch and 21 people on YouTube is not that bad. That's
And
actually a
let me
pretty
just
good
ask
live
you,
number. If there's anybody
another
watching on
question.
Rumble,
Now-
we're doing really well.
Your failed presidential
My,
campaign has
peer
been
tube-
raising money to try and cover your debts. And you were questioned about this yesterday.
Here
and
it is.
Failed to answer
This
the
is
question,
real.
that Senator Warren asked you. And so I want to ask you again regarding these emails that you have sent to raise money. How much has your presidential campaign made fundraising off of this administration's complete disregard for the workforce at HHS?
Excuse me? I didn't hear the question. The last part.
How much money has your presidential campaign made off of fundraising, off of this administration's complete disregard for the workforce at HHS?
Zero.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 emails from this week and the week before regarding fundraising that you are currently doing through your presidential campaign.
Without objection.
And finally, I want to ask you.
And I can show you
I
those.
have a
I can show you an email right here that says, "Dear Jonathan, America's health crisis is out in the open for all to see, but exposing the truth isn't enough." This is the last paragraph. "We need action." It said something about red dye number 3 in the paragraph before. And that starts with raising $2.5 million to retire the campaign's debt and position RFK Jr. for the next phase of leadership. So he is trying to raise money to pay for the security debt, supposedly, that he has after the pandemic, even though, as far as I know, he's always had private security and it's run by his best friend. So it's weird, it's odd, it's strange, and it's definitely true, but they're not really making him answer it. It's kind of weird.
I should have received.
They just said we're going to enter it into the
What
record.
different vaccine schedule should I have received?
I mean, the pollen article suggests that blacks need fewer antigens than.
This is
so
so
you get the
dangerous.
same measles vaccine. but
Mr. Kennedy, with all due respect, that is so dangerous. Your voice would be a voice that parents would listen to.
It
That is so
suggests that
dangerous.
blacks
I would
need
vote with
fewer
Mr. Kennedy
antigens?
because
Wow.
your views are dangerous to our state.
Whoa.
I mean, do you think science is dangerous, Senator?
Whoa.
This is published
I hope
peer-reviewed
it's Mystery Biology Theater 3000. That would be perfect.
Senator Collins.
Maybe that's what I
who
should
would be
call
on
it from
the
now
time. She
on.
was in an intel committee. So Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kennedy, welcome, first of all. I agree with you that there needs to be more focus on chronic diseases like diabetes, like Alzheimer's. But it concerns me when I read a quote from you that says, "I'm going to say to NIH scientists, God bless you all. Thank you for your public service. We're going to give infectious diseases a break for about..."
I mean, one of our chatters on YouTube is bringing up observational studies and hand hygiene. Another great example to remember in medical history is the Greek doctor whose name escapes me, who first showed that many or all ulcers in the stomach are actually bacterial infections and can be treated with antibiotics. And for 10 years, roughly, after that guy started to say that and successfully treat ulcers with antibiotics, we were still cutting them out with surgery. So there's a lot of examples like this. That's a really good one, though.
In many cases, it's Congress rather than HHS who sets the funding levels for various diseases.
But NIH decides, has panels that decide who gets funding, not Congress, Senator.
I want to share with you a discussion that I had with the Maine pediatric nurse practitioner. She raised the concern that if people are discouraged from getting their children vaccinated, we will lose the herd immunity in a classroom.
Of course we will, because it's spreading asymptomatically in the background, like James Lyons Weiler said in April of 2019 before the pandemic started. All vaccine preventable diseases are spreading in the background asymptomatically among vaccinated people. That's what he said.
Vaccinated child, and thus at risk of getting the infectious.
It looks like she's wearing a gold bike chain, which would be extremely badass.
Your response to that?
My response is that vaccine uptake for the COVID vaccine, for example, is down to 23%. And all vaccines are dropping, and they're doing that because people don't believe the government anymore. We need good science, and I'm going to bring that in. I'm going to restore trust, and that will restore vaccine uptake.
Well, you're certainly correct about what happened with the COVID vaccine, but let me switch to the polio vaccine. Do you think that the polio vaccine is safe and effective?
Yes, I do.
And so
I think the polio vaccine has some of the sketchiest history and the least amount of evidence.
Not at all.
Wow.
The state of Maine has seen a steady
Polio spreads because you get poop in your mouth. This is just silly.
Cases over the past decade. We talked a little bit about this in my office. In 2023, Maine had a record number of Lyme disease cases.
Oh, Lyme
nearly
disease.
3,000 reported cases. Fortunately, there is a promising vaccine trial for Lyme disease that it's underway at Maine Health in Portland. Access to a Lyme disease would be a monumental step forward in reducing the burden of this disease, which can have lifelong effects. I've seen it in members of my own family. As HHS Secretary have confirmed, what influence would you exercise over new vaccine approvals, such as one for Lyme disease?
Senator, you and I have talked about this issue. I've had Lyme disease. I lived in the epicenter of Lyme disease. Every member of my family my immediate family has had Lyme disease. I had a son whose face was paralyzed for a year. I have a son today who has been suffering with devastating effects from Lyme disease for 2 years. There's nobody who will fight harder to find a vaccine or a treatment for Lyme disease than me.
I very much appreciate that assurance, and I'm sorry that your own family has been so adversely affected. In Maine, we have a lot of people who work outside and work in the woods, and ticks are everywhere. So this is a very important issue to me. Thank you.
And to me too, Senator.
Let me, we're almost to the end. Let me acknowledge
everywhere.
Senator Moody has also been here the whole time. And so thank you, Senator Moody.
Thank you for the recognition.
Yeah, well, just incredible diligence. Thank you. Both Senator Sanders and I will have a couple questions, and then we'll each have a closing statement, and then your long national nightmare will be over. So anyway, first, a couple more of commit-type questions. If you are confirmed, do you commit that you will not work to impound, divert, or otherwise reduce any funding appropriated by Congress for the purpose of vaccination programs?
Yes.
And do you commit that you will not impose new grant conditions outside of congressional direction for state, local, or global entities that in any way limits, restricts, or rescinds access to vaccines or vaccine promotion programs?
Yes.
And then this is the nice thing about listening to all of this. Let me ask this. I've been impressed. One, you've handled yourself very well. I've been impressed that on many things you are familiar with recent medical data. But on other things, you haven't been. So let me bring up two things which are very pertinent now. While sitting here, I went up to look at the medical literature on these issues. And here's a title, Why Parents Say No to Having Their Children Vaccinated Against Measles, a systemic review of the social determinants of parental perceptions on MMR vaccine hesitancy. And they found that fear of autism is a major driver for vaccine hesitancy among those with a college education or higher, influenced by internet social media narratives over physician-based vaccine information. I'll go back to something I said earlier. You got to follow it, man. There's a lot of people that look to you for, do I get vaccinated or not? People that I kind of know. But here it says it's not just my anecdote, it's actually out there. But when I raised, and you said, well, if I show you the data, you'll change your, because I asked, will you unequivocally, without qualification, say that measles vaccine does not cause autism? And you said, if I show you the data.
I will publicly apologize.
So here's
and say that I was wrong.
Here's a meta-analysis from 2014, and you quoted Cochrane on several occasions, which for the people watching is a meta-analysis. A meta meaning they look at everything and then they come to a conclusion based upon as much facts as they can get. And here is such a study, and the title tells it all. Vaccines are not associated with autism, an evidence-based meta-analysis of case control and cohort studies, and they ended up looking at 5 cohort studies with roughly 1.2 million children. Now, this is from 2014, and it has a whole bunch of articles it references. And then I got a text from a former employee of the NIH, I emphasize the former, who says that in early in the President Trump's term, you and colleagues sent 90 papers for review by people at NIH. They felt like the NIH folks felt that without exception, they were severely lacking methodologically, and are found that they indeed showed the safety of these vaccines. We tried to engage Mr. Kennedy, but his colleagues refused to acknowledge the expertise of dozens of NIH scientists we made about those papers. Now, you're a smart guy. You're reading the medical literature, and you're coming up with the recent medical literature on certain issues. But here is both older article, summarizing lots of older articles that have come out since the original refuted Wakefield article in the Lancet regarding measles and autism. And here is somebody who, you know, it's he said, but somebody who said that previously you've had this presented to you. So back to me. I'm a doc trying to understand. Convince me that you will become the public health advocate, but not just churn old information so that there's never a conclusion, as Senator Hassan suggested, but that will become the influencer for people to believe, no, there's 1.25 million kids studied and there's no autism associated with measles. You tell me, you see what my question is in there.
Senator, I'm going to be an advocate for strong science. You show me those scientific studies, and you and I can meet about it. And there are other studies as well, and I'd love to show those to you. There's a study that came out last week of 47,000 9-year-olds in the Medicaid system in Florida. I think a Louisiana scientist called Mawson that shows the opposite. So there are other studies out there. I just want to follow the science. And I will do, if the science says that I am wrong about what I've said in the past, as I said, I will publicly apologize. There's many times I've been wrong about science. If you look at my Instagram account, when I'm wrong, I apologize for it. And I say I was wrong. I don't have any problem. Science is a process of challenging hypotheses with new evidence. And scientists have to be able to admit when they're wrong. Epidemiological studies, the Institute of Medicine has said repeatedly in 2013, 2017, when they investigated this, has asked CDC to do certain studies, animal studies, bench studies, observational studies, studies of the vaccine safety data link. CDC has not done that. Oh, I want them to do that, and I want the best science. I can guarantee you, on my word of honor, that if you show me science that says that I'm wrong, I'm going to say I was wrong. I don't have any problem. There's nothing that would make me happier. We need to be able to look at the science and get IOM involved, the National Academy of Sciences.
The time is being run out here very, very effectively.
And one of the things we need to do, I think, is a subject that we haven't talked about here. Why don't we know what's causing this epidemic? Why hasn't the CDC been looking at other hypotheses to determine the etiology of why we've had this dramatic 1,000% increase in this disease that is destroying our kids? Is probably the biggest issue. Why don't we know the answer after 30 years of steady rises in autism rates? Why don't we know the answer?
Bernie's getting
we
ready.
Should know the answer.
Starting his engines.
What was that? What was that last article? Did you mention
that article? Is by Mawson, Mawson.
And it's regarding measles and what?
No, it looks at the entire schedule, and it says it's a study of 9-year-old boys, 47,000 9-year-old boys from the Florida healthcare data.
Okay, somebody won the prize today, dropping a Chester M. Southam MD link into the chat of YouTube.
Position.
Gaius Tesla is the winner today.
Senator Cassidy's line of questioning.
Nice work.
Mr. Kennedy, in an interview in July 2023, you stated, quote, "I do believe autism does come from vaccines." And you have, the end of quote, and you have praised a gentleman named Andrew Wakefield for his research. What studies, you talk about the need to be science-based, to get our information, good information to make decisions. What studies?
Look at those hands. Look how hard he's worked his whole life. Can't you see it?
Vaccines cause autism.
Can you see how hard he's worked?
Sit down with you.
No, please, just answer me that.
I mean, look at the Mawson study, Senator.
The what? Yeah,
Mawson, just look at that study.
Yeah, I will, and that was published.
But I don't want to. I wouldn't rest on a single study.
Right.
And all studies can be
Okay. Don't mean to be rude. I don't have a lot of time.
Just saying
you would not be. I just heard you say you could not be happier if you were proved wrong. Mr. Chairman, I asked to put into the record 16 studies done by scientists and doctors all over the world.
16 studies
that vaccines do not cause autism.
Checkmate.
Without objection.
Look at the IOM assessment of those 16 studies, Senator. The IOM has assessed them. But listen,
let me get to it. Don't have a lot of time. I apologize.
Why don't you sell Brian Hooker's book right now? Why don't you sell Brian Hooker's book right now? Sell Brian Hooker's book right now.
Again, I apologize.
Why don't you sell the green book right now? It's full of studies.
Scientists have estimated that the COVID vaccine saved 3 million lives. President Trump said the COVID vaccine was, what, quote, one of the great miracles of the ages, end quote. You have said the COVID vaccine was the deadliest vaccine ever made, end of quote. Was the COVID vaccine the deadliest vaccine ever made?
The reason I said that, Senator Sanders, is because there were more reports on the VAERS system, on the vaccine adverse event reporting system, which is the only surveillance system.
Jessica Rose. That's Epigirl.
And there were more reports of injuries and deaths than all other vaccines combined.
It's not a vaccine, it's a transfection. Just say it, Bobby.
According to VAERS. I don't know, because we don't have a good
surveillance system. It's a transfection.
You disagree with the scientific community that...
I'm agnostic because we don't have the science to make that determination.
Really? Okay. Prescription drug prices in America, as you know.
And by the way, I think President Trump did an extraordinary job on warp speed because he wasn't just focusing on that one intervention. He was focusing
on... He called it a miracle, but you have cast doubts on its efficacy. All right. Prescription drugs. we're going to make America healthy. I agree with you that we have to need a revolution in the nature of food in America, physical exercise, etc. Very, very important. But there are people who are going to get sick, and they have to go to the doctor and find out why. 1 out of 4 Americans today cannot afford the prescription drugs their doctors prescribe because we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. We made some progress under the Biden administration of negotiating prescription drug prices with pharma. First time that's ever happened. Now, yesterday you told me that the White House was going to issue something affirming their support for continuing those Medicare negotiations. Turned out not to be quite accurate. They came up with some bland statement, could have been written by pharma. Very specific questions. Do you believe and will you insist that Medicare continue to negotiate prices with the pharmaceutical industry so we can substantially lower prescription drug costs in America?
President Trump has made it very clear to me that he wants to negotiate.
Negotiate is a big word, Bobby. It's a big word.
Hey, buddy. Hey, buddy.
But no, I
That's
use
a big
defend
word, buddy.
A particular law. Will you defend the law?
Stop
in the
waving
Inflation
your
Reduction
very
Act,
soft
which
hands.
already is negotiating prescription
I
drug
feel
prices.
threatened
Trump wants us to negotiate drug
by your
prices.
clammy soft hands.
So you're not telling me that you will defend the law that we passed, which has already had significant
I feel
success.
threatened by those clammy soft
I'm going to
hands.
comply with the law, Senator. Congress passed the law. I'm swearing an oath to the Constitution. I'm going to comply
You're
with the
going to have a
laws.
significant influence on healthcare policy if you are.
And I'm going to comply with the laws.
Let me just say this in conclusion, Chairman Cassidy. President Trump and Mr. Kennedy are quite right when they say that our system is broken. They're right. Our economic system today is broken. 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of American society. Wages have been stagnant for American workers for 50 years. The economy is broken. You know what? Our political system is broken and corrupt. You have a handful of billionaires in both political parties who contribute huge amounts of money to elect candidates in this room throughout the United States Congress. That is a broken political system and a real threat to democracy. Our healthcare system is broken. And it's broken for some of the reasons that Mr. Kennedy indicated. We have not paid attention to the fact that we have massive amounts of chronic disease. We have not answered the question why in the richest country in the history of the world, our life expectancy is lower than it is
He's going to vote for him. He's going to vote for him.
So I think in many ways, President Trump and Mr. Kennedy have asked some of the right questions.
Oh, my
gosh.
gosh.
Their answers will only make a bad situation worse.
Oh.
So let me ask Mr. Kennedy again.
Uh-oh.
If we want to make America healthy, will you assure the American people that you will fight to do what every other major country on earth does, guarantee health care to every single American?
I'm going to make America healthier than other countries in the world right now.
Will you guarantee do what every other major country does? That's a simple question.
And by the way, Bernie, the problem of corruption is not just in the federal agencies, it's in Congress too. Almost all the members of this panel are accepting, including yourself, are accepting millions of dollars from the pharmaceutical industry. And protecting their interests.
Clapping, clapping, clapping.
I thought that would no. I ran for president like you. I got millions and millions of contributions. They did not come from the executives, not one nickel of PAC money from the pharmaceutical industry. They came from workers.
In 2020, you were the single largest
because I had
receiver of pharmaceutical money.
Contributions from workers all over this country. Workers,
you were the single,
not a nickel from corporate PACs.
You were the single largest acceptor of pharmaceutical dollars.
Oh, man.
1.5 million.
Yeah, out of 200 million. All right, but you have not answered. Last question. You have not answered my question.
Oh, man,
Mr.
that
Chairman,
was
we're
so
doing
bad.
How do we make America healthy if you don't guarantee health
Chairman,
care
we're
to all
literally
people?
3 minutes over here now.
Well, so are other
how long
people.
does it keep going? At some time, you're just battering the witness,
Not
Bernie.
battering the witnesses. I'm
Yes,
trying
you
to get
are.
an answer.
And
Hey,
you're
the
getting
show is
upset at it,
good
you're going
today.
at it just like everybody
Wow.
else would.
Wow, nice. That was great. Well done, Bernie. Well done, Bern. Yeah, baby.
Before I ever entered politics, before I was ever thinking about running for office, I practiced medicine for 30 years.
Oh,
I worked
man,
in
here we
public
go.
hospitals in California, Louisiana, specializing in liver disease, caring for those who otherwise would not have had a specialist. If you will,
It's not my
dedicating
fault,
life
Mother Wart 5. You
to
should have
saving
had headphones on.
That is being a doctor. That ethic guides me now. In my opening statement, I told the story of my patient, an 18-year-old girl with acute liver failure from hepatitis B being air ambulanced to LSU Shreveport Hospital for a liver transplant. Now, let me finish the story. Her mother wasn't allowed to fly in the helicopter, so her mother drove the 3 hours from Baton Rouge to Shreveport. Now, when she arrived, they let her visit her daughter before she went back to the OR. And the mom goes in to say a prayer, squeezes the daughter's hand. The daughter's eyes open, and she said, "Mama?" And the daughter began to recover. Powerful story with a happy ending. But as a doctor, I saw endings not so happy. I just had a friend text me, 2 children died in an intensive care unit in a Baton Rouge hospital from vaccine-preventable diseases this past month. So my concern is that if there's any false note, any undermining of a mama's trust in vaccines, another person will die from a vaccine-preventable disease. Now, you've got a megaphone. Maybe you and Bernie, Bobby and Bernie. Of everybody in this room, the 2 of you have the biggest followings, tremendous credibility. And with that influence comes a great responsibility. Now, my responsibility is to learn, try and determine if you can be trusted to support the best public health. A worthy movement called MAHA to improve the health of Americans, or to undermine it, always asking for more evidence and never accepting the evidence that is there. I looked at the article from Dr. Mawson, and it seems to have some issues. I'll just put that to the side. And that is why I've been struggling with your nomination. There are issues ultra-processed food, obesity, we are simpatico. We're completely aligned. And as someone who has discussed immunizations with thousands of people, I understand that mothers want reassurance that the vaccine their child is receiving is necessary, safe, and effective. We agree on that point, the 2 of us, but we've approached it differently. And I think I can say that I've approached it using the preponderance of evidence to reassure, and you've approached using
It's a lot of work on the
evidence to
vaccines
cast
right
doubt.
now. A lot of work on the vaccine schedule
Now,
in
put
this
differently,
discussion.
We're about the same age.
A lot
There's
of time
70-year-old
dedicated to it.
71-year-old man who has spent decades criticizing vaccines and who's financially vested in finding fault with vaccines. Can he change his attitudes and approach now that he'll have the most important position influencing vaccine policy in the United States? Will you continue what you have been, or will you overturn a new leaf at age 70? I recognize, man, if you come out unequivocally, vaccines are safe, it does not cause autism, that would have an incredible impact. That's your power. So what's it going to be? Will it be using the credibility to support lots of articles, or will it be using credibility to undermine? And I got to figure that out for my vote. You have the power to help rebuild, to help public health institutions re-earn the trust of the American people. Now, let's be political. I'm a Republican. I represent the amazing state of Louisiana, And as a patriotic American, I want President Trump's policies to succeed in making America and Americans more secure, more prosperous, healthier. But if there's someone that is not vaccinated because of policies or attitudes you bring to the department, and there's another 18-year-old who dies of a vaccine-preventable disease, helicoptered away, God forbid dies, it'll be blown up in the press. The greatest tragedy will be her death, but I can also tell you an associated tragedy that will cast a shadow over President Trump's legacy, which I want to be the absolute best legacy it can be. So that's my dilemma, man. And you may be hearing from me over the weekend. You may be hearing from me over the weekend. I once again thank you for your time, and I yield to my ranking member.
Who's that? Bernie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for your job today in conducting this very, very important hearing. Let me reiterate my concerns. Every person on this panel, and I would hope everybody in America, wants to make us the healthiest country on earth. And I applaud Mr. Kennedy for raising the issues and talking about some very important truths. But what I am not hearing from him are some very specific policy issues that we absolutely need if we're going to make America healthy. It is unquestionable that when 68,000 Americans die because they can't afford to go to a doctor, you got to deal with that. And I have not heard one word about the need for universal health care that exists in every country on earth.
Every country on earth has it.
Drugs, because the pharmaceutical industry is
Come on, Bernie.
and charging us 10 times more in some cases than the people in other countries. I have not heard the definitive answer I need that we're not going to pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs.
That's
And
different
one of the
than
points I think Mr.
universally
Kennedy made, which is
guaranteeing something, Bern.
Healthcare is not just medical care. It's a lot more. Talk about the food industry. We have held a hearing. Senator Cassidy and I held a hearing a couple of months ago where we made the point that the food industry is, in fact, poisoning our kids with addictive food that is leading to obesity, diabetes.
So
heart
why not
conditions,
fix that
etc.
instead of funding the health care
And
that profits
I
from
hope-
it? Oh my
I
gosh.
hope that our Congress and the White House will have the courage to take on a very powerful food industry and demand that the products that they sell our kids are in fact healthy and non-addictive. In many ways, what the food industry is doing today is what the tobacco industry did 50 or 60
Oh,
years
wow.
ago.
You're such a,
And we talk
wow,
about
you're so
making
smart.
America healthy today.
Duh.
Again, it's not just
Low-hanging
doctor care,
fruit,
medical
ladies and
care.
gentlemen. This is what the
We
scam
have
is.
millions of people working for starvation wages. You cannot be healthy if you're working 50 or 60 hours a week and you can't afford the rent that your landlord is charging you. Stress kills. Stress makes us sick. So, Mr. Chairman, let me just say this. I think the issues that have been raised in this hearing today are of enormous importance. I look forward to working with you and other members of this committee to make sure that we develop the policies that have the courage to take on very powerful and wealthy special interests. So, in fact, that we can make America healthy. Thank you.
This concludes our hearing. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions, questions for the record will be due tomorrow on Friday, January 31st at 5 p.m.
So I think that's where we're going to leave it here as well. Is that the right side? Yes, it is. It has been nice seeing you again. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, not to let the health freedom movement become a joke on our grandkids. If we don't waken right now, it will become a joke on our grandkids. There is only one time in history that they can collect the data. That's this generation and the next generation. And so it is over the course of the next 20 years, maybe 10, that they would like to invert our sense of individual sovereignty to a sort of debt to our society that would amount to experimental animal status, so that they can feed our health and genetic data into an AI that doesn't exist now, but will in the near future. This is their God. This is their plan. This plan was first really described by a guy by the name of Joshua Lederberg, who happened to be the sort of behind-the-scenes mentor to a guy by the name of Kerry Mullis, who I believe didn't understand how PCR would be used as malevolently as it has been used over the last 5 years, and probably will continue to be used. The way that I think it was used was that a background signal was misconstrued as spread using non-specific PCR tests, maybe even by the planting of a pure sequence somewhere, and the reporting of that pure sequence by an agent of this sort of global national security state. They would have rolled out transfection with a lot of placebos to make it very easy to meet the manufacturing quotas and to make very sure that any safety signal that was available was non-significant. And the vast majority of people would think, wow, that didn't hurt at all. RNA cannot pandemic. They've known that since the start, and much, much before that. Intramuscular injection is dumb, is something that we should have probably known already 20 years ago. But again, we inherited these charlatans from our parents, so it's hard to blame us. Transfecting healthy people is a crime. It was a crime. And at the beginning of the pandemic, there are thousands of academic biologists that should have known better. And the population pyramid is a real thing. There is a population pyramid in every Western country, and in almost every Western country, there's a problem that needed managing. And they managed it with murder and lies called a pandemic. PCR is not a reliable diagnostic the way that has been used, especially at the start of the pandemic. The only thing I know for sure is they can make large quantities of pure DNA, and PCR will find them. Synthetic recombinant genetics is in fact how they make all biologics in pharmaceutical companies, and in fact making mRNA in theory would be cutting that step one step short without the purification process, and so that's really actually cheaper. That's what makes transfection a crime. They should have known that. We should have known that. All the adults with a academic degree in biology and bench experience should have known that. And anybody that's working in a pharmaceutical company would know how easily placebo could be used to create this illusion. And everybody that's actually a dissident in front of us, been put in front of us by the military programs of social media, have been telling us that there are hot batches and not so hot batches, which is absolutely nonsense. One of the final mythologies that needs to be discussed every day until every child in America and around the world understands it's a mythology is this idea of endemicity and being endemic. The idea that the right combination of RNA bases in a mud puddle could go from being a few copies to infinite copies in the background forever. That is a mythology. It is a lie, but that is also one of the foundational myths upon which an RNA pandemic is based. The only thing you know for sure is that they can make a synthetically pure quantity, and that signal would be detected no matter how they deployed it or where they put it. And if they used if they used non-specific PCR tests on a background and rolled out placebo, that basically explains everything. People don't get sick when they're healthy, when they have the love of family and friends, when they're drinking clean water, clean food, have a clean environment, and have been exercising their whole lives. But of course, bad biology doesn't want you to think about it that way. Bad biology wants you to believe that genes explain everything, and therefore we know that evolution occurred because we found DNA, and that is just an absolute lie. It's an absolute fake. It's bad biology. The way out is, of course, starting to speak with precision, like, intramuscular injection is the single worst way to be exposed to a toxin. Beware that people like Brett Weinstein and other charlatans that are behind this are going to start talking about adjuvants as if their very specific knowledge of these different chemicals is going to separate the good parts of vaccines from the bad parts of vaccines. And this is all part of the same mythology that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and a lot of these health freedom movement fakers are going to roll out on us and tell us that, okay, these vaccines are safe because they don't have these adjuvants, or these vaccines are safe because these adjuvants have been tested. And this fundamentally ignores the truth, which is intramuscular injection is the single worst way to be exposed to a toxin and the most difficult way to evaluate the outcomes from that exposure. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just a biology coach. I hope I can help some people think differently about biology. And if that's the case, we might be able to break this new world order before the past becomes mist and fades into erased, and the erasure is forgotten, and the lie becomes the truth. Can't let that happen, ladies and gentlemen. We cannot let that happen. We cannot let our children get on this train where we defeated disease in the past with epidemics, and epidemics in the past using vaccination rather than clean water and sanitation and washing hands and good food and lack of pesticides. This kind of thing, this mythology needs to be broken. We cannot let our kids inherit the mythologies that we inherited from our parents. We cannot pass on a mythology of novel coronaviruses that jump from other species. We can't let them get on a train where PCR is a useful diagnostic. We cannot let them get on a train where there are variants of RNA molecules circulating forever. And we cannot let them get on a train where they believe that very special RNA molecules created in a gain-of-function laboratory could threaten all of humanity. Because these mythologies will enslave our children if they ride off into the galaxy on that train. If we let the health freedom movement pull a fast one on us and take the fluoride out of water and, the red dyes out of cereal. You can explain it in one slide if you really were trying to be honest. It's for all the marbles, ladies and gentlemen. Don't let them get away with it. Do not let them get away with it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you again tomorrow.